Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 265 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on November 4th, 2023. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, big show this time out. We have a new Avatar comic to review. So in the second half of the show, we will be doing a full in-depth deep dive into Azula in the Spirit Temple, which just came out earlier this week. But before that, we actually have a lot of relatively big pieces of news covering a little bit of everything, pretty much. So we'll try to get through that as quick as possible here. So we're just going to jump straight in, and I'll start with basically the most, I suppose it's the second most recent, as of something that broke not that long ago. But Avatar Generations is confirmed to be entering end of service as of like yesterday, basically. And so it will fully wrap up. Servers will shut down next month, December 2nd, and that will be the end of the game. For some, this might come out of nowhere and you're like, wait, what happened? But if you've been following the details of this game, you will of course know that I think we covered it on one of the last two podcasts. There have been major layoffs, and this is not just like a small portion of like key people, but like what's been reported is like 70 or 80% of the development team on this game gone since basically late August, shortly after the live stream they did covering the Azula update. Just everyone gone hours after that. And since then, the game has really struggled to put out new content. There's been the obvious sort of stuff that they have, repeat banners. They put out one new thing, the Long Feng banner, but based on what we know, that was mostly ready to go in the background. So what seemed to be the case was just that what was left of the development team was only able to just keep the game running for the last kind of couple of months, and their capacity to make new content was basically nothing. And so now the game is ending. It's obviously going to be live until December 2nd. They're doing stuff like where I think they said on the Discord, they're going to basically give people like a weekly kind of like mega pack of kind of currencies, just so you can pull lots and on the banners and stuff like that. All the banners are basically back in the game, so they're making it, as fun as possible. They've of course disabled all ways to sort of like spend money to buy stuff, and they've kind of got rid of a lot of the restrictions on how many times you can do certain things. So, they're at least doing that sort of stuff. But it's a pretty disappointing thing here to see this game, which only officially launched at the start of this year, is now over before we even get to the end of the year. So there's a bit more to talk about. But Greg, what were your initial reactions seeing them announce the end of service for the game?
Yeah, that was it's pretty sad to hear. It's definitely not a positive thing in any sort of way to hear, any sort of thing coming to its end of life. But I mean, it has, sadly seemed like this might have been sort of what was happening after they let so many people go. But it is pretty sad just seeing, more Avatar content that, had a decent following and decent backing behind it just have to sort of go to the wayside here.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's the big thing that we miss out on. And it's like, I know a lot of people, this game just was not for them. They didn't like it. But I think what everyone in the fandom did like about this game was sort of the new art that we got, especially for like the Kyoshi update. People were really freaking out when we got to see official art for Janju, Kelsong, Kyoshi Rangi, all those type of characters. Even some of the newer characters that they introduced for like the Kyoshi era, like Talarik Tug, and some of the newer characters for like the Aang era, like Kiwok, and so on, were interesting, and they were doing new stories around these characters, especially knowing kind of what they had planned, that it felt like they were finally on the verge of kind of really opening up the story for some of these game original characters. They were going to do like an original Kyoshi era scenario, introducing some new Kyoshi era airbenders, like an anti-Daofei mercenary group that was coming up soon. Major story beat with the Dojo Master character was coming up. all like new canon content like approved by Avatar Studios, that's gone. And now we don't get, say, like Kyoshi Update Part 2, so we're not going to get art of like the Flying Opera Company. Thankfully, within the game already, there is stuff like data mined out of the game, of course, official art for Father Glowworm, which everyone's liked being able to see now since it's been kind of more heavily publicized. But that's the big loss here, is that some of that stuff is just we're not going to get to see. And the game had plans for timeline content for all the avatars, basically Wan, Yang Chen, Roku, everyone, and we don't get that at that point. Also, I think the game had a decent community just around like people liked the game because it actually had some complex kind of combat mechanics, and there was something to kind of build towards with building your team, getting the characters. I think they could never fully keep up to date with the balance that was probably needed, and the speed, even when the development team was at their best, was never quite where it needed to be. But I do think it was getting to a point where it could have been better overall. But yeah, it's a frustrating loss because it is a loss of small but regular content like that we could have got over the course of the next couple of years. And just for confidence in Avatar stuff, it's not nice to see, even though I think it seems to be the situation where I don't think this game is shutting down because the game in a way specifically has been a failure. It feels like it's kind of business mismanagement from above, and the way the kind of industry is going, because there's been like layoffs all the way across the game industry. Like a big thing the last like week or two, like I'm really into Destiny, layoffs at Bungie, even though that game is pretty successful, but they had super high expectation. Are they in line these days? Even like I think Insomniac, who just put out Spider-Man 2, they had layoffs reported recently. Fortnite, big update just launched. They had layoffs not that long ago. It's happening across everything. So I think I think people have pointed out that like this game developer is under the Embracer Group, and it's the Embracer Group that's really had the financial problems that have effectively made this happen. Yes, the game could have overall been better, but I think it's more on that than anything that's caused this issue. That the second they made the decision to get rid of so many people, there was almost no saving the game. But do you have any final thoughts on the whole situation surrounding this?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like it's just like a perfect storm of just, everything that sort of brought it down. Because, I mean, people were into it, people were playing it, so it's not like it didn't have an audience. But, like you're saying, a combination of, either mismanagement, everyone leaving, just the entertainment industry in general in America is just having a really hard time with everything that's going on. And then also the fact that there isn't any as far as Avatar in general, there's not a huge as of now, there's not a huge pull on it in terms of it being in sort of the larger sort of media entertainment sort of like conscious right now, because we have the movies that are coming, we have the books and a new book that's coming and all this other stuff, but without something really driving the show forward, or this universe forward, it's kind of hard for any sort of individual thing, even on the lower end of things, to sort of have as much power to show that it's as worth as it really is, or as we think that it is as fans of the show. Because there definitely is stuff out there for Avatar, and we have other news things that'll show that it is popular enough to gather audiences in certain ways. But for some of these smaller projects, they need a little bit more than sort of what's out there right now.
Yeah, like this is why it's almost like so unfortunate that like they couldn't just kind of keep it going for a little bit longer, maybe try to get other people involved, because like one of the pieces of news we'll talk about shortly is it seems like Netflix Avatar is coming in February, and that would have just, I think, led to a surge in popularity for Avatar and pretty much everything related to it, and the game could have benefited from that. And then shortly after that, we assume Avatar Studios will actually have to talk about their animated stuff, and it's like they've missed out on this by being like 6 months too early, kind of type thing.
Which is typical.
Yeah, the just that sense of just what could have been. And especially with, like, as far as I'm aware, there's another mobile game coming out, like the one I was contacted about, the whole Barbarian Death Cult thing, the more classic style mobile game that we don't really know much about right now, but that's scheduled for, I think, early-ish next year. And is that going to suffer from the idea that, like, oh, previous failure Avatar mobile game, or will it actually hit at the right time? We'll have to wait and see. But in more positive news, this kind of came out of nowhere but feels super fitting. Avatar: The Last Airbender in concert got just dropped into the world. So basically, it seems like to coincide with the soundtrack release, which is just like 2 weeks away. November 17th for the Book One soundtrack kind of remaster. Avatar in concert, though, was announced initially with kind of four locations, four dates basically: London, Paris, San Francisco, and Brooklyn. London recently got announced for a second date because it sold out. It was the first one to sell out, and they are saying that more shows are going soon. And yeah, this is going to be one of these things like they do, like I know that a Sonic concert thing that they do that tours around, and now Avatar is kind of getting one of these with the remastered soundtrack. Based on what it says, it's the whole soundtrack, like it's bits and pieces from Book 1, 2, and 3. So I guess we have that confirmation there that the whole soundtrack basically has been remastered to a certain degree. And yeah, they're going to be kind of showing clips and stuff like that on big screens at these things as the live orchestra, of course, plays. So lots of people kind of enjoying this. Of course, a lot of demand for like more locations, so it's more available to people. But very popular thing that I hope does well and I hope expands and that more and more people can actually get to see it. But what are your thoughts on this kind of out of nowhere soundtrack everything?
Yeah, no, it's definitely pretty exciting to see that, Avatar is getting this sort of treatment. I definitely am interested in it. I already got tickets for the closest location by me. So hopefully I'll be able to check it out and see how it is in person. But yeah, it's definitely pretty cool to see that we're getting this thing. And yeah, this is a pretty, I guess, relatively like recent thing that they've done with a lot of media for like, I guess, maybe the last 10, 20 years or something like that. Like I also know that they did one for Final Fantasy as well that I think one of my friends from work went to and saw and said it was really cool. So it's definitely a more common thing to see nowadays, and definitely interested to see how it actually is in person.
Yeah, so yeah, the first date is January 21st. So it's all early 2024, January, February, some March stuff, and I guess ongoing after that. So yeah, exciting stuff. It'll be interesting to see like what they have like in terms of like, I assume they'll sell the soundtrack at this, but the vinyl was this very limited thing, so how's that going to work? They'll have some merch, I guess, t-shirts and stuff, but we'll see what comes out of it. And if like, this maybe the 2024 stuff like coincides with, maybe that's when they announced the Book 2 soundtrack release, Book 3, that sort of stuff. But super exciting stuff. There's even a nice new kind of piece of art with Aang kind of as the kind of concert poster, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that's that. Then we'll go into some Netflix Avatar news. So I already mentioned this already, but just basically a few hours ago, relatively notable kind of like rumor, kind of leak account, what's it called, My Time to Shine Hello, which I think we've talked about news from them before. Just straight up says, Avatar: The Last Airbender is coming to Netflix on February 22nd. Just nothing else. I think they put out one tweet like teasing that there's Avatar news coming soon, and now just straight up this is what it is. There's no report say, it's just pretty concretely this is the case. Now we'll find out for sure, I'm guessing, next week, because next week is Netflix Geeked Week, which is running, of course, the whole week. They'll have updates on everything that they're doing, basically, including they've already basically announced the 9th is going to be the day that Avatar is included in. They've already like teased, shown some visuals and stuff like that, which we'll get into related to this, that there's going to be Netflix Avatar news on the 9th of November. So I'm assuming this is just the date being leaked a little bit ahead of time, because this fits in line with what everyone's been saying. There's been rumors about January, rumors about February, rumors about March. So late February, I think, makes complete sense. Finally, this thing will come out. We can finally get to see what it's like. But what are your thoughts on that? The date seemingly, maybe finally, really leaking out here.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is pretty much the time for it to be out. So I think it's probably, it seems like that's going to be it. Hopefully we get a little bit more to see about it ahead of time, and then it'll be out.
Yeah, and the reason we're so confident about big news on the 9th is that they previewed this basically by showing what has previously been the big news update, like screenshots. So they showed us like Fire Nation characters here. So we have 5 new images. We get to see Ozai, Iroh, Azula, Zhao, and another Zuko, this time without the helmet on. So lots of discussion about this, of course, but it's still only the screenshot. So my general thoughts on these images are that I think Ozai looks, really good. I think Iroh also looks really good. I still have some doubts about the way they've chosen to do the sort of like Fire Nation kind of military uniforms and the color kind of schemes that they've kind of gone for. I sort of get what they're going for, but when everything else otherwise seems like it's very more colorful, matching the show, it's a little bit of an interesting choice to maybe take some of the color away from the kind of soldier uniforms. But I think for the most part people have been like pretty good, not too much negativity. There was a little bit of hate towards Azula's actress here, but I think a lot of people kind of shut that down really with just like, look, the performance is going to matter a lot more than the character's face perfectly matching the anime. I don't really see much from this to be super critical about, but not a lot to be super like positive about, because again, I think the other elements that we'll see when we see it in motion will be the things that tell us more about this. But what are your thoughts on these 5 new images?
Yeah, no, overall, I think, as far as we're, talking about adaptations and everything like that, this definitely feels like it's the closest, the best that we've seen so far out of this stuff. So I don't know. I think overall, I mean, it feels pretty cool so far. I mean, like you said, it really is going to matter how it works in motion with the acting and everything else. So I don't know. It's always hard to tell from screen caps, how it's actually going to play out. I mean, these are better than some of the other ones we've seen. So I think this is probably a lot better representation. And, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of these scenes in motion in like a trailer or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together. But no, overall, I think it's cool. I'm curious to see how it goes. But other than that, I'm just waiting to see.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like that is the expectation for Geeked Week, is that proper trailer, none of the weird 10-second showing fancy element symbols that they did the last time. Actually show us some of this stuff. Let's hear some, lines from these actors, see it in motion, show us a little bit of bending. It needs to have that, and then there also has to be the release date. I think that's the expectation here, is trailer and release date. Otherwise, what are you doing if it is going to be just a few months away? But I don't know, is that what your expectations would be for the kind of big event here next week?
Yeah, if they're really going to try and push it, then it seems like they need to get it out there, and if everything's done, it's like, why not?
Mm-hmm. And then yeah, that will bring us then into our sort of New York Comic Con and New York Comic Con like related news updates. I think we have to probably talk about the novel separately, because basically everything about the novel came out before New York Comic Con, and it was only like well after New York Comic Con that we actually like really heard a lot about what they actually said, just because there wasn't really news as such about it. But that's just the kind of situation we have here. But either way, what we have here is that we did, surprisingly, this is not what they usually do with an earlier announcement than usual for the next Chronicles of the Avatar book. So this is going to be book 5, and it is called Avatar: The Last Airbender: The Reckoning of Roku. So there's no cover this time, I guess, because they have done a relatively early announcement here. But we do have The Reckoning of Roku coming out eventually, like the following day, got the description for the book, which we will go through shortly in just a second, and then sort of after we already knew, we basically got the announcement that they were going to announce it at New York Comic Con, which they did, but it kind of didn't matter because they'd already done it ahead of time. So it was a bit of a weird one. But what are your thoughts just on the fact that we, well ahead of time, know what's next for Chronicles of the Avatar, and we have a new author, which we'll get into as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. I mean, yeah, it is funny that it was like already announced ahead of time, but I'm sure not everyone actually knew that because not everyone follows all the news as much as we might hear. So yeah, no, it's cool. I'm glad that they at least thought about it and was like, okay, we can keep this thing going even if we have to switch it up with a new person.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually just looking at the listings right now, and I'm noticing the release date has changed. It's no longer July. It's listed both on Abrams and Edelweiss as being the 20th of October. So I had not noticed that before. So a bit of breaking news right now. That does seem to be, I guess, across the board, just a full-on delay for the book into August. And I suppose given that they've done this quite early, well before they even possibly announced it, it's an interesting one. It is only pushed back by like basically a month, but still, I guess that means it'll be the first novel to not release in July, which is interesting. But yeah, the big stuff with this is that yes, FCE is done with the novels. He's done his 4 books, and now we have Randy Rebay as our new author. The description for the book says this: a young Avatar Roku has only just commenced his training at the Southern Air Temple when his erstwhile friend, Prince Sozin, requests his aid in preventing the Earth Kingdom from claiming a remote Fire Nation island. Despite his inexperience, Avatar Roku slips away with the help of an irritating young airbender named Gyatso. As the reluctant companions delve deeper into their wayward mission, they begin to realize that even greater threats lie ahead. Plagued by self-doubt but eager to prove himself, Roku fights for his life and the lives of others, while ensuring that the hidden secret of the island doesn't fall into the wrong hands. This searing 5th installment in Chronicles of the Avatar series explores the beginning of Roku's journey from privileged Fire Nation noble to the powerful but indecisive Avatar whose hesitancy may ultimately pave the way for war. So that's interesting. A lot of the speculation with Roku was that surely he is an Avatar where we have to go older than the typical YA approach here. It seems like everything in his life happens after he's finished his Avatar training, post like being like 28. But no, they're giving us super early in his training, like 16-year-old Roku, right at the start of his airbending training. So he only really has firebending and I guess a little bit of air here. This is before he's even friends properly with Gyatso. But the interesting part here, obviously, is that they're setting up this situation where he seemed to leave Sozin, but Sozin immediately requests help with a political issue straight away once he leaves. So there's a lot of intrigue about like what's going on there. Is there some scheme from Sozin in the background here, or is this like an honest request for aid, and what's actually happening here? We'll get into this quite a lot here, another hidden island plot point. This is like 3 in really quick succession for Avatar. But what are your thoughts on this? New author, and then what they're going for with the...
Yeah, I mean, I think, we knew we were going to get a new author, and from everything that I've seen so far, it looks like he'll do a really good job with things. They had him have a video intro to him, doing the book and his sort of background and stuff. So that was cool if you were actually at the panel to see that. And then, the story itself, it sounds interesting. I mean, yeah, I guess, we're always trying to like think of like, from the storyline of what we know, what would be the more sort of like interesting stories to actually hear them tell. But I think in terms of like the book, if you don't want to like mess with too much other things, which I feel is something that they're always, trying to do while give us new content as well, probably something from his younger years would, work better in that sort of case there. So yeah, for those of us who I guess wanted to see more of his older stuff, this might be a little bit of a disappointment. But I think the story itself, the way that they're plotting it so far, it seems pretty interesting. All of our avatars always have to go on, a couple journeys that are always sort of, new in their time, and they have to figure things out. And looks like we're gonna actually, see how the bond behind Gyatso and Roku actually sort of founded. So I think that's cool to see here. And we do know in like the grand scheme of things like what happens. So like it's not like a huge like mystery, right, of like what happens in the end of things, even though they try to make it say that way at like the end of this little blurb here. But we know the end result. It's just sort of how do they get from point A to point B, and if they make it interesting, then it'll be a cool story to read.
Yeah, because like I saw some reaction to this that was like, wait, why are we doing Roku as the next Avatar? Like we know his whole story, but like I think the obvious point to that is that like, do you really think like the Avatar and the Fire Lord is his entire life? That like we've in detail covered everything about him when that's the most like skip through his life possible like thing you could possibly have, where we cover like a minute and a half on his whole Avatar training, and then it's all about the couple of incidents that make up the issue with Sozin. There's so many gaps in his life to cover, and I think the RPG material highlights that there's a lot going on, which I think speaks to maybe some of the disappointment is that I think people really wanted the Princess Zaisans, which people are intrigued by that character, and the fact that they haven't done it here kind of is like, well, will we see her in this book? Like, it's not the right era to properly, I suppose, do the RPG story, but when is the RPG story going to happen, if at all? But there's some interesting stuff here, because like this will be properly getting to see more of like teenage Roku. We got a little bit of it at the start of Avatar and the Fire Lord, but it'll be interesting to see what he's like early on, and that kind of lacking in confidence character that we kind of saw. How this relationship with Gyatso actually forms, how he reacts to having to, go ahead with this request from Sozin, all that sort of stuff. It's definitely intriguing, and I kind of like that at the end they do acknowledge the whole like, oh yeah, he's a Fire Nation noble. That's going to be a massive kind of culture shift for him, going from Fire Nation nobility to being a monk, basically, because he is going to be at the Air Temple for years here until he moves on to the next nation. So I'm wondering, like, will they address stuff like his parents and stuff like that, like more about like his life prior to all of this, because it's almost unique in a way. Like, we haven't really gone in depth that much on a typical Avatar's journey, where they only find out the Avatar at 16, and then they get the normal approach to being the Avatar. So I think there's a unique aspect to it there. Like, how protected is he going to be from being involved in world affairs by like the elder monks at the temple here? They're going to, I guess, try and stop him from getting involved in things, but he wants to, and all this sort of stuff. So definitely interesting there. But yeah, then we're waiting for the New York Comic Con panel. Like, we're expecting news, like core comic announcement, and I think there's the big contrast here, obviously, between the experience hoping for news from home, and then if you were actually at the panel, you actually got the news as it was being presented. This was particularly kind of notable, that I think there was a lot of frustration, because there was nothing during the time of the panel, nothing was coming out about this at all from the official sources or fans kind of live tweeting or anything like that. And the only thing that actually came out in the middle of the panel was the Braving the Elements announcement. So the publishing panel had information about the podcast as like the first big kind of update, and I think people were getting even more frustrated. So we'll talk about that briefly here. Braving the Elements finally confirmed for that season 3. This was obviously meant to be announced at San Diego Comic-Con. Again, cancelled panel. They were meant to be there. We get it here. They have like a video and stuff like that. They had someone from Nickelodeon Podcasts at the panel. So in the actual panel itself, how exactly was this done? Like, where in the middle of the panel did this announcement of the podcast take?
Good question. Yeah, they had a lady there that was announcing all this stuff, and she introduced herself as part of the podcast team and working with Dante Bosco and Janet Varney and all that sort of stuff as their sort of like, I guess you could say, like representative and stuff. So yeah, it was after they did a couple early announcements, and the moderator just sort of handed it over to her to sort of speak about it, and they did the video that they had there to sort of announce it and everything like that. And then that was pretty much it as far as like the announcement as far as that, which I don't know, it seems kind of interesting or odd considering everything else that they announced there, but it filled out the panel, so I guess it worked in terms of what they were trying to go for. I don't know. Yeah, that's I don't know. That one did seem, I guess, a bit sort of odd out of all of them considering everything.
So yeah, this just felt like an announcement they had to get out there in some sort of a big capacity. So they confirm a few things here, like season 3 is going to be 40 episodes. It is going to be them going through book 3. It's going to debut in January, and beyond that, it's the same stuff as ever. They plan to have special guests, bring on super fans, of course, and all this sort of stuff, as is expected. No mention of, like, given that this will all be through 2024, if how Avatar Studios news will be incorporated into this. I'm guessing it will, but it's a bit of a weird situation because they're weekly, they have 40 episodes, so this will bring them through most of 2024, so it'll be interesting to see how exactly that all plays out. That's definitely my take on the podcast, is that I don't really care about their review kind of path through the series. It is the interviews that I find to be the more interesting stuff, and the occasional time they have news to talk about, because it's basically a podcast with access to the people, whereas like the fans don't have any access at all. But what are your thoughts as we head into this kind of like season of the podcast that's relatively close to the bigger material?
Yeah, I mean, the podcast, depending on your sort of, I guess, stance on what they're doing, if you're, already heard most of it or whatever, you can sort of take it or lose it. But it seems like from what they were saying there that they're, again, they're pretty excited about it. They're going to have, like you said, they're going to have more interviews. They do have access to those people. They're going to be putting it more on YouTube, if not all of it on YouTube. So it'll actually be some sort of, regular sort of video component to it. So it seems like they're going to be using, the actual YouTube channel that we're always sort of wondering how they're going to use it in sort of a more official capacity in that sort of way. So I don't know, it feels like they're trying to integrate it more, and they have people that are willing and ready to do it, and they have, whatever their budget is to actually sort of do it. So I don't know, it looks like they're probably going to try and coincide it more with, stuff that's actually happening, at least on the the Paramount Nickelodeon side of things. So it feels like they're trying to do more with it now than they were before. At least they have the idea of that.
And so getting back to sort of the way that kind of everything went. Obviously, what ended up, I think, turning out to be the case was that, I guess, internet service within the room was really bad, and that's why there was no like live coverage during the panel. I believe that to be the case.
Yeah, so I mean, the actual room itself was sort of like one of the main sort of like side rooms. So it wasn't, in the past we've gotten like, the bigger rooms when there's shows and stuff going on like that. So this wasn't even one of the bigger sort of side rooms. This was like one of the smaller side rooms, because I've gone to a couple of the panels over there at that point in time. And yeah, this room itself, I mean, it was small ish, and it was just like blackout, so there was like no way of getting anything in or out, and it didn't have like some of the rooms, they do have the they'll live stream it or whatever. This room didn't have any sort of set up for that at all, because I was hoping that maybe they might have that, since they did have it in some of the other rooms at least. But no, this room, it didn't have any of that. So I think the stuff that I was sending you, I sent some of it during the middle of things, and it just couldn't go through, or at least my service didn't go through. So yeah, no, as soon as they announced it, I think I was pretty quick to actually send it, but it just didn't go through until I got to one of the other panel rooms, and then those rooms, I guess, just had slightly better service. But I mean, the whole place where they have the panels now in the Java Center is like a glass encased metal box basically now. So it's even different than what it was in like years past when I was sort of sending you stuff. So before it was like just like underground and stuff like that. This time it's like in a, I don't know, Faraday cage almost. Not really that bad, but you know, that's what it feels like. So that's sort of probably why, at least from any like regular person there, wasn't gonna get anything out. I'm sure they had like Wi-Fi and all that other stuff if the people there, you know, were hooked into it and wanted to send it out, but not any sort of, you know, regular patron would have had access to that, I think.
Yeah, and so this, the usual fan coverage that we usually get being gone, combined with like no official coverage during it, was a bit like, what's going on here? Like, why, given that there was announcement, why wasn't Dark Horse posting about this? Why wasn't Nickelodeon posting about this? Because last year at New York Comic Con, they were quicker than they were this year to actually put the stuff out officially. I believe even last year, like the Nickelodeon account, like had just boom, there's the image like immediately, like during the panel. So they obviously had nothing scheduled, and that's just that communication problem of like, this is a big panel, like you're hyping this up on like your Twitter, like Dark Horse are posting this ahead of the panel. They're like, hey, this is the time the panel's on at, and then it's like silence, and I'm like, who's this for? Because anyone attending the panel, you've posted that too late to get anyone in the door because it was packed. And then you're just teasing people who want the news, like who are sitting at home, and it's just like, what? So they don't do that stuff that well. But again, this is where I wouldn't be entirely critical of like Dark Horse and the publishers. I'd mainly be like Nickelodeon Avatar. Like, why aren't the Avatar accounts posting about this, given that they're the ones overall over everything? That Dark Horse can't say a lot because it's the Avatar license. Here's the Avatar stuff posting about it. So eventually, you know, minutes after the panel comes to an end, the stuff that you sent me came through, and I was posting it up. It meant that like over the course of like the days before New York Comic Con, it meant like I got to post about all of the stuff revealed at New York Comic Con before anyone did, like officially. So it was kind of a weird thing being like got the scoops on all of this. Because the big thing was everyone was like, oh no, they did it again. They didn't announce the Korra comic. Because there'd been no information during the panel. Like people had the pitchforks out. They were ready to go. And then finally I posted, and it's like, you know, success finally. So yes, we got the announcement of this Korra comic. A bunch of things confirmed here because of how bad communication has been. It is in fact one-shots. It's a trilogy of one-shots. This is the first one here, the Mako short story, one-shot comic. The Mystery of Penchuan Island. I'm not really sure about the pronunciation. I don't know, did they say this out loud? Do you have any idea what the pronunciation of this is meant to be?
They did, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that sounds about right. This is where like a video would have helped. Penquan. So if it's kind of based around Chinese, I guess the Q is meant to be sort of like a CH kind of sound, like chi. But who knows? But either way, we have the cover, no date as far as I'm aware. So like from what you told me before, they basically said very little about this except showing the images that they showed.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Yeah, so they're obviously cautious about putting out early release dates because I think they know people don't like it when they keep changing the release dates over and over again because they're already like 9 months behind schedule. But what they told us before, like last year, was that it was meant to be a 2023 book. It's not a 2023 book. So no date attached to this, but realistically, the expectation would probably be that this book will come out around this time next year. It would be my estimation. But we'll have to wait and see because it's going to be after May, which is when the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer comes out. It's definitely going to be after that. And we assume before the end of the year. Couple of months before the end of the year, so it's probably like a July, August, September, October style book, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, Mako focused comic, Mystery of Penquan Island, cover has Mako, of course, on the front and his detective kind of unit. Bo Lin is in the background as well. And then the really, really interesting element, the burning family picture of young Mako and Bo Lin with their parents, San and Naoki. And then also at the bottom, I guess, we see the entrance, I guess, to Penkan Island, the harbour, and a ship coming in. So really interesting cover. The inclusion of that picture has everyone very, very excited because it suggests backstory. And we, of course, know both Mako Bolin's parents were killed by a firebender, but not much detail added beyond that. So everyone's expecting there to be like, oh, is this something related to the mother's backstory? Because we kind of know San's backstory, but like we don't know a lot about Naoki. I don't know. What are your thoughts on what we see here in the cover and your kind of like initial expectations?
Yeah, no, I definitely get the idea of, backstories, some sort of history with the brothers and their sort of family, which I think is something that is really, worth exploring, just from them in general, because we know some of their sort of what they're doing now in their time, but they feel like they have this whole sort of history of them, just growing up on the streets and having to survive, that we know some of it with the tribes and stuff like that and the gangs, but there's, their actual stuff that we sort of started to get alluded to when we sort of found out a little bit about their family, but we haven't really got the full scope of it. So I feel like the comic is probably like one of the best avenues to do that.
Mm-hmm. And we also did get some early preview pages as well. So we have 3 pages here. We get odd numbered pages, so we go from page 5 to 7 to 9. And basically what we have here is that Mako's in the police station interrogating, asking questions of some kids. The kind of oldest boy here seems to have seen something, and Mako's kind of getting on well with them. We kind of skip a page, then it seems like their mother arrives and takes them away, kind of gives out to Mako for, I guess, questioning them. The boy says goodbye, kind of feels like he connected with Mako, or wishes he could have said something more as he walks away. Then we cut to Mako arriving back into, I guess, the apartment with Bo Lin, and he basically puts his coat on the hanger, takes it back and leaves, and it's like, what just happened here? And I guess Bo Lin and Pabu are like, what just happened? So Mako obviously has finally latched on to, I guess, something the kids have said, and I think people are speculating that if it's going to be linked into their backstory somehow, it feels like, is there some sort of like child kidnapping style plot going on here where they're taken to this island, and that the parents sacrificing themselves to save Mako and Bo Lin saved them from being kidnapped by this group. Everyone is leaning towards the idea we're going to see the person who killed their parents, if that's what they're going for here, but we don't know a lot now. We don't have a description because there's no date or anything like that, so we're just going off images so far. But what are your thoughts on the preview pages and what you kind of think is going on here?
I mean, I don't know, that some of that seems like it could happen, but I don't know. Some of that feels like it might be a stretch just from seeing these images alone. But I mean, clearly it is him working some sort of case and gathering evidence as, he normally would do. And obviously it's having his sort of spark of inspiration if he's leaving that sort of quickly there. I do wonder how, the brother will become really sort of involved in this, if this will be like, he needs Bo Lin for like his backup or whatever when they actually do get to the island with whatever the main sort of crux of the issue actually is going on. So I don't know. I think there's something going on, but there's not enough for me to just sort of make it up yet.
Yep. So yeah, we're eagerly awaiting this one to get officially like solicited, so it has like an initial release date. If it follows the same path as the last announced comic, Bounty Hunter Tea Brewer, that got put up on like Penguin Random House like a month or two afterwards, so we're kind of hoping that happens. Like there's maybe a chance it's November solicitations has it, probably a little bit too early, but maybe next month we'll find out some more details about this. But either way, I think most people are pretty excited about this, apart from the obvious like people who hate Mako as a character and are like, why are they doing this with him? But he needs character focus, and this is the argument I've had with a few people, is that like if we want to improve the character, he has to be in content. So do you just want him to forever like be this character you don't like, or actually going to allow them to do something with him. He needs it. Someone like Asami also probably needs one, and that's where probably some of the speculation is going to go now, is that, okay, confirmed, one-shot comics for Korra. Who's going to be the other two, done by the creative team with Alexandria Monique and Kiku Hughes? Asami feels kind of ideal, but we don't know. The Iroh June comic was a shock announcement. They could do something crazy with Korra comics. And speaking of that was probably the other big thing from Dark Horse, is that they posted more kind of preview material about Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, which is scheduled for May next year. So we got a couple more kind of pages here. They officially posted like 3 of them, but I think they actually showed 4. So one of them they didn't actually put out, but like you obviously sent me an image that has that in it. With this one, it's very much, it seems like the very early pages of this comic. It's Jasmine Dragon, Iroh serving tea to some kids, getting on very well. Get them hooked on tea here or whatever. They walk outside and there's people protesting against Iroh specifically. He tries to calm them down with tea, and then in the page that they don't have up officially, we get this look into the kind of corner, and we see some kind of shady character off to the side. And then it seems like they actually talked a little bit about this, and you mentioned stuff to me like a tea cartel was mentioned, and they said something along the lines of like people June worked with, like June's parents' backstory will be kind of like delved into, and then we know from the description of the book something about Iroh's backstory is going to come into play here. So what did they specifically say about this comic?
So this was pretty cool when they were talking about this one, because I don't know if I really expected them to talk too much about it, because I figured like it's already out there and coming out. But yeah, the whole idea of there being some sort of actual interconnection with these characters and their backstories, and sort of June's parents and how she sort of got into Bounty Hunter, that sort of coincided with sort of Roku and the tea brewing and sort of this cartel and them having sort of issues with him in where he's currently located. I don't know, it sounded a lot more interesting than I think we initially sort of thought it would be. At least that's how it came off to me, because I didn't really think too much about it of how they're gonna make this seem sort of interesting. I mean, I think it still would be cool if we got more more sort of the history of Iroh, since he's been around for quite a while at this point, and I'm sure there's like tons of stories we could tell about him. But in terms of seeing where this goes, it definitely adds a bit more sort of intrigue to the reason why they would like want to take him specifically. Now, I don't know if these images here are sort of showing that this is all sort of like a ploy to sort of get him to see like it's people that are upset with him, but really they're trying to take him out or something like that. I don't know if that's what they're sort of going for, but it seems cool in terms of where this could actually go in the end, even if it is sort of just a one shot here.
Yeah, because I think just in general, like the idea that like there are people who would protest against like a former like Fire Nation general being the owner of a popular tea shop, like that feels like a real thing. Or it could be this kind of manufactured thing that there's a reason for him to address his past. And then, if there is interconnection between the backstories, I'm guessing it's that Iroh encountered June's parents at some point. That would be the obvious thing. If they use the old lore, we know at least June's father was a bounty hunter. But it seems like they mentioned parents plural, so we'll see what they do there, which could be but this is sort of like the idea of like, and based on like the description of the book, it's like, okay, the tea cartel shuts down Iroh getting supplies for his tea shop. He leaves the tea shop to sort this out. This is when he's kidnapped by June, and we start the actual mission, whatever it is. And we know that like June in the book is going to kind of explore the idea of like, does she want to kind of, I suppose, continue on the family thing of being a bounty hunter, or go in a different direction now that we're post-war? That's an interesting concept. So I think there's been some more intrigue about this book, but I still think people are a little bit like, this is a weird combination of characters. Like, why this of all things that we're doing? But it makes it then quite interesting because it's very difficult to predict what the third like Avatar one shot is going to be after this, because it's like Azula, Iroh, and June, and now we can have double one shots and stuff like this. It's a bit weird, but we'll see what they do. But that's that. And for the most part, I feel like that is most of the news. Now, obviously, there's like 4 publishers at New York Comic Con. It's like Dark Horse, Abrams, obviously like Roku Novel, Mako Comic, Bounty Hunter, the Tea Brewer. Magpie Games were also there from the RPG, and apparently Nickelodeon were there publishing. Did they actually do anything about like Nickelodeon publishing books? Like, did they show like I Am Zuko, I Am Katara, any of those type of books?
No, no. I mean, it's weird that you say Nickelodeon Publishing because I guess they're sort of like the like umbrella for like everything, right? But like in terms of like them as a person, would that count as like the moderator who's there, sort of like leading things along as sort of like their representative? Because like as far as like the panel people, there's not really someone for that, or at least directly. So I don't know, it's kind of odd, but no, there wasn't anything in terms of like any of the sort of like side books that we're always sort of mentioning that sort of seemingly come out of nowhere.
Yeah, because I know from SDCC we definitely knew that they talked about the Heart of a Hero book. They talked about I Am Zuko. That's where the cover came from, and that's where there was a little bit of expectation that like, oh, I Am Katara was announced. Is there going to be a cover for that? But they obviously didn't go over any of that stuff, which is like, okay, fine. That's the stuff people don't super care about. But that's that. And then Magpie, they're obviously in a bit of a weird place where they're still sort of in the process of like releasing the Republic City book, where like I have my physical stuff. I think a lot of people who initially pre-ordered it have their stuff, but they're preparing for like the late pre-order window, and I guess the full-on public release. But they didn't talk about any of their new content. But based on what you told me, it seems like the person they had there, one of the writers, actually had some interesting stuff to say about the RPG.
Yeah, no, he was pretty cool. He really knew his stuff and was able to like bounce off of questions with like the other people on the panel. There was like a point where him and FC were going back and forth between like getting inspirations for like their stories and stuff, and how they like aware of each other's stuff and how that can work, and how he's like designing the stories, and how his ideas behind adding more of these stories that aren't really seen and including more of the representation, and sort of how they're figuring out the art and all that sort of stuff, and breaking down the characters. So like his stuff, even if it wasn't like a new sort of announcement type of information, it was pretty sort of insightful in terms of like what he was actually talking about. Because his talks was probably like his and Faith Aaron were probably like the most like interesting to like sort of listen to in terms of like if you were there like at the panel, especially like when they did have the questions that they already had set up, sort of answering stuff like that. So no, their stuff was good. I mean, they did mention, like you said, like some of the stuff that's currently coming out, or that will come out that they've already sort of been working on, but nothing in terms of any sort of new things in terms of anything like that. But he definitely was there and was, willing to contribute to the panels overall.
Yeah, because with Magpie, the thing we're expecting next is I suppose it will be Settings Toolkit Spirit World, because they said there'd be a Spirit World book alongside the Republic City one. But no news about it yet. But I think that could be kind of interesting, depending on how they do the kind of lore section on the spirits. But I guess we're going to be waiting until next year to find out about that and what more they're doing with the RPG. But I suppose just to wrap up the New York Comic Con coverage, I guess was there anything else at the panel that like was kind of interesting and that didn't come out publicly?
I don't think so, other than sort of what I've sort of gone over already. There wasn't really sort of like a big exclusive thing. I mean, the panel for the most part was pretty packed. You definitely, if you wanted a seat or anything like that, you had to get there pretty early to get there. But there was only so much that could really stay there, and after a certain point, sort of the excitement buzz sort of died down. So and they didn't, like we've talked before, they didn't open it up for anyone for audience sort of questions or anything like that. So there wasn't anything like that that could have been asked sort of like directly. But overall, it's a fine sort of panel where they just have sort of the extra media sort of content to sort of talk and discuss without any sort of like TV animation type of stuff. So sort of along the lines of what we've had for the last couple of years, really.
Yeah, I suppose based on like kind of crowd reaction, like did anything that was talked about get more of a reaction than others?
Well, definitely the comic stuff got the most sort of reaction. And then also the book actually got pretty good on a reaction too, especially when we actually sort of got the video from the next sort of author. That was pretty cool to actually see and to get that sort of idea behind that one. Because I think the room definitely sort of quieted down when FC sort of made his sort of announcement and stuff like that, even though, if you've been following it, it kind of was sort of like seeing that was going to happen, but it's different there, I guess, when you're there in person and everything like that. So there's the differences there. But I think those were probably sort of the main ones. I mean, even the podcast one got some news. I mean, it's a panel, it's everyone there in person, so things are going to get some reaction regardless, but there definitely was some things that got more reactions than others.
And then I suppose with New York Comic Con especially, I think it probably needs to be noted that like October next year is a year until Avatar Studios. So are you expecting a big Avatar panel at the convention next year?
I don't know. I would hope so. I mean, considering what they're doing, I would expect the interest and the hype for it, assuming that everything is on track with Avatar Studios and everything like that, that it would be more prominently featured. Like I would think for next year in terms of like rooms, because that's how I base everything off of how how popular it is and how much it can sort of draw an audience, that it would be one of the bigger rooms on that sort of panel section of the Javits Center. So I would think it would be sort of up in that sort of level in terms of interest, like actually getting its stuff sort of like live streamed and broadcast. But I don't know, it's kind of hard to gauge that since Avatar Studios overall has been so sort of like guarded with everything.
Yeah, that's the big thing is like by this time next year, I do hope we know some stuff finally about Avatar Studios. It's definitely the time where like if they don't do it by then, like they're really relying on I don't even know what before, like because it feels like the convention would be like almost like a week or what in or around it actually coming out in 2025, and then you'd just be relying on Comic-Con that year, which seems way too close. So it feels like they have to, but we never know. But I guess we'll know in the build-up if they have Mike and Brian at one of these things and what the names of the panels are, as ever. But yeah, that has been the news. Obviously, there's going to be some news over the next couple of weeks, where next week we're expecting big Netflix news. The week afterwards will be the Book One soundtrack release, and then hopefully something happens in like December to finish off the year. But from there, we will go into the main section of the video, the podcast, and that is our review for the new comic, Azula in the Spirit Temple, which is finally out. It's been especially for me, it's been a long wait finally getting the chance to talk about this, because it's been like nearly 4 months since like I first read this, and it's been quite a wait to finally get back around to talking about it. And where to even start here with this? I guess just general thoughts. I've put out a lot already, so Greg, you got a chance to read this for the first time. What are your overall thoughts on Azula in the Spirit Temple?
It's I don't know, it's a bit sort of odd or weird in my sort of thinking of it, because I think it's good. Like I do like it. I don't hate it or anything like that. So I'm not like, I don't think not that I'm normally hypercritical of things, but I'm definitely not sort of hypercritical, sort of like hating the story. I think it's a cool story. It's a good sort of like, I guess, sort of like intro exploration into some of the things that people have already sort of thought about sort of Azula and sort of her character and her sort of like upbringing and her development, as well as just sort of showing, I guess, overall to the audience, to us as the viewers, sort of her more of her mental process, more of her thinking process, how, she's able to sort of realize things, but still has, some hangups that's going to sort of hold her back from, what, people who might want her to sort of, be fully sort of redeemed or, go towards the other end. But I think, it does a good, I guess, starting point of bringing her onto whatever the next path is going to be in her sort of real sort of character development. Definitely doesn't sort of like give you any sort of big resolves or anything like that, which I don't think many people were expecting that, but maybe some people were. But it still leaves, a good bit open for her character that we're going to hopefully explore in the future with, other projects that are coming down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel pretty similarly, like in that, like, yes, I do think it's a very good book. Like, I gave it a very good review. I sent the publisher a very good review because I think just in terms of a character analysis piece, it's probably one of the best we've seen in the comics, in that I really feel like Faith Erin Hicks just like gets Azula. It feels like it's in line with the previous material, and it gives me confidence that they know what they're doing with Azula as a character. The problem, if there is a problem with this book, is just that it's kind of like the stuff surrounding the book, surrounding the planning of like, where's Azula going to turn up next? That, like, we waited 7 years for this. This is the first Smoke and Shadow, post Smoke and Shadow Part 3 content for Azula since Smoke and Shadow Part 3, excluding the little tiny content that we got in the RPG, which was basically just that, like, what you expect to happen after Smoke and Shadow is in fact happening, and then this comic happens. 7 years is a long time to finally come back to an open arc, and I think this is where the marketing of the book, the fact that, like, literally on the back of the book it says, Azula must confront her past and finally face her chance at redemption. For some people, they are going to take that very literally and go into the book like expecting the arc is done here. They're going to do it all here. But I think if you at all know about the comics from the last few years, the fact that we're only doing one-shot comics, we don't do 3-part stories anymore, the output of the comics has been much lower than it's ever been, it's a bit silly to expect Azula's arc to be done here. One, because it's an arc that I think needs more time than one 72-page book, but also they don't do big stuff in the comics anymore. Like, I can appreciate what some of the recent comics have done, but there's very little stuff that's like blow away incredible, like where we were when the comics started with the likes of like The Promise, The Search, The Rift. I think we're still quite a long while away from getting back to those type of things. Like, it feels almost crazy these days that, wait, they put The Search out as a comic? They did that in a comic book? Like, that level of story, doing that stuff with the characters, it feels weird based on what they're able to do now. So I think, like you said there, this feels like a bit of kind of, we acknowledge that it's been a very long time since we've tackled it, so let's give you sort of a refresher course on the character. This is every element covered to a certain degree that this character is going. If you haven't watched the show in a while, read the comics, here's all of the issues that she has. The betrayal of Mei and Tai Li, issues with her mother, issues with her brother, and other related stuff as well. Plus, like, the comic elements with, like, the Fire Warriors and stuff like that. It's just, this is in continuity, but also we want to tackle a broad scope with Azula. Here it is. And so, if you are up to date with sort of Azula analysis, you definitely will come out of this feeling like, this is in line, but I don't think they did that much. There's subtle growth. I think there's some key moments that we'll get into. But the progress is probably not what we maybe expected or wanted. But this is what the comics are doing right now, where we're not doing major progress, except for, we expect, Avatar Studios content. And that's where the lack of communication about those comes into play, in that I'm convinced the next time we see Azula is in one of those things. Like, I mean, Azula post Azula in the Spirit Temple. The next time we're seeing her, I'm pretty sure it's going to be in an animated project. But what are your thoughts on that? Just based on this book, where will we see Azula again?
Yeah, no, that definitely feels like that's going to be one of the key things that they're going to sort of focus on. If it's going to be sort of like, a side animated project, or if they're going to, more heavily integrated into the movies and sort of have, flashbacks, backstories, however they want to sort of, portray the sort of narrative of her character and where she actually sort of ends up at the end. It feels like that's, it has enough draw on it, obviously, if we're still talking about it all these years later, that it would be worth it for them to put it in there, in terms of, getting out there for the people. Because, I mean, even if, this comic, does really good and it, makes the sellers list and all that sort of stuff like the other ones have, which I don't know if this single one would potentially have that much power, no, it's still going to go under the radar for a majority of fans. Like, we're talking about it and people we, converse with will know about it. But, a lot of this will get sort of mentioned in sort of like comments on social media, and people will be asking like, where is that information coming from? And then you'll refer them to, either the wiki or the comic, and, then they'll know about it. But it's not going to be, in the front of everyone's faces, I don't think.
Yeah, like I think the kind of broad view of this comic is that it kind of feels like this is the book to transition Azula away from some of these comic-specific elements to where she ends. She's very open and she's able to be used wherever. Whereas if you just picked up, like, say this comic didn't exist and the Avatar Studios just picked up, you kind of have to do a bit of backstory explaining, like, who the Fire Warriors are. And you'd almost have to do, like, a really detailed explanation of Smoke and Shadow. But where she is at the end of this, you can more be like, oh, you can sum it up with just Azula's been on her own for a long time, a bunch of stuff has happened. You don't have to go into the details, just the emotion of the character and stuff like that. I think that's kind of what they're doing here, because they don't, I think, really want to do a lot of comic recap. They obviously don't want to do adaptations in Avatar Studio. That's kind of part of what this feels like.
Yeah.
The only issue is, of course, that, like, based on the leaked image, of course, the characters look like 10 years older than probably even where they are in the comics. So, like, it's a large gap potentially if that's the plan for Azula. But who knows? Maybe the second movie is going to be set a bit before. That's maybe your Azula focused one. There's a variety of things that they could do. We don't know. But I think that makes a lot more sense than out of nowhere us suddenly getting like, oh, 3-part Azula comic. I just don't see that happening in the next few years at all. So yeah, let's get into this, because I think there will be parts of this where we just stop and have a bit of a Azula character analysis of like, I'm actually a little bit surprised Azula said this thing, or that she feels this way about this thing. Like, there's a lot to delve into there. Like, if you really like the depth of Azula, that's where this comic is at its best, because you can really get into the nitty gritty about the wording of things that she says. So yeah, let's get into this. So yeah, Azula in the Spirit Temple, written by Faith Erin Hicks, art by Peter Wortman, colors by Adele Matera, lettering by Richard Starkings, and comic crafts Jimmy Betancourt. It is, of course, a one-shot comic, so 72 pages. It's obviously under Avatar Studios, so it's like 100% canon. It even says, special thanks to, this person, and Mike, Brian, and Joan Hilty at Avatar Studios. So, like, it has the support of everyone there. It's not just a random. So we're going to be going through this sort of like page by page effectively here. So obviously, if you have the comic, now's the time to get it out and read along with us. That's the way we're going to do this, and we'll of course stop at key points for discussion. So where we open up here, we open up with a bit of narration from it's some are worthy, some will never be. I know the difference. And this is kind of, this book is like, I come out of this book going back to this first line and like, do you know the difference? Or like, you think you know the difference. And I think that's the interesting thing with Azula, is that she is a judge of people that's kind of good in some ways, but bad in others, because she has such a skewed view on kind of almost everything, the world, but especially like what weakness and strength is. What she views as being worthy is different than what it's like actually worthy. But I think it's just an interesting narration given kind of what we we talk about and discuss over the course of this book. But we have, of course, the Fire Warriors here, starting another attack here, this time against this granary, and Azula basically just orders the attack to come in. But did you have any thoughts on that, like, initial narration, very much start the book?
Yeah, no, I think along the lines you said it's just keying us into what she thinks is, right in the world, and how she's leading her group towards, at least in her mind, making Zuko better, right? But it definitely feels like she has some questioning to figure out.
So yeah, Azula orders the attack on this granary. It seems like there's only 2 guards. They're talking just kind of casually, and it seems like they're able to sneak in around the back. Then suddenly Ty Lee shows up, and she's just checking in on them. She gives them tea, and it's all happy, good times. Like, of course, you see Azula reacts to Ty Lee being betrayed her, and she's happy with these other people, and Azula doesn't like that. So she lights the crates inside the granary on fire, as Ty Lee literally says, drink up, I have a feeling we might be needing our auras fortified tonight. And we get a kind of boom as there's an explosion within the granary. It's like set on fire here. But Ty Lee reveals that, oh no, this has been a trap to lure the Fire Warriors in. And many, many more guards come out. So Azula's small squad here is suddenly outnumbered, and the situation completely reversed. And I think this is a really cool setup here, because this directly relates to like the RPG material, where they talk about how Azula has been doing constant like raids and attacks like this to try and force Zuko's hand to become the person she wants him to become as a leader. But the implication is that many of them have been failing. She's been effectively like losing members of this team on each of these missions, failing more and more. And here's another one of them where, as we see here, she allows herself to be tricked, and it's going wrong. But then it's also just cool to see Ty Lee in this leadership position, that opposing Azula is not the entirety of Team Avatar. It's Ty Lee and a bunch of no-name guards. So there's some interesting stuff at the start here. But what are your thoughts on this initial sequence with the trap?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good setup. I think it's, it's not something that you would, I guess, typically expect of Ty Lee and her character, which is why it sort of like stands out. But it's good because it's a character that has relation to Azula, and has a lot of sort of history there, and we see later on how it's even more sort of integrated into sort of her mindscape and Azula's way of dealing with things. So I think it's a good way of setting the stage for what she's going to have to deal with already right here in the beginning, just meeting someone that she already knows she has issues with.
I suppose just on the character designs, what are your thoughts on the fact that they've obviously changed up the masks? Now, they never point this out anywhere in the material, but it seems to just be a kind of clear-cut thing of like, I guess they're no longer hiding under the Komura Kage guys, but they still wear masks, and they just get more comfortable masks. What are your thoughts on that change on the Fire Warrior?
Yeah, I noticed that, and I thought that was interesting, just because I'm sure there's like more sort of like historical context like sort of behind them, as sort of like with the other ones, but it definitely is something to note, to see how they've changed, and even how by like the end of it they're not really sort of using them in that sort of way. So it definitely sort of stands out, and I think you can sort of take it or lose it in terms of like if it works for you in terms of the design, but just the fact that you can see sort of their expressions, I guess, a bit more underneath them, sort of shows that they're more more out there, or they're trying to be more out there and doing things, but things aren't necessarily going the right way at this point.
So where we left, of course, we had Azula's group surrounded by Ty Lee and a bunch more guards, so it's like they're pretty much outnumbered like 2-1 here. And Ty Lee, very confident here, leading this kind of counterattack, is just saying like, I won't let you get away this time, Azula. Fire Lord Zuko has had enough of your mischief. And she just comes in. We find out later on this Fire Warrior's name is Chio. She comes in to attack Ty Lee. Ty Lee just dodges the firebending, chi blocking. Chio's down, gets captured in the background. The other Fire Warriors have an emotional reaction to this, except Azula. And yeah, we really focus on just how skilled Ty Lee is here. Like Kyoshi Warrior Ty Lee just being very confident around guards that also seem very competent here. They're able to really kind of control this fight. Ty Lee, obviously, with her amazing non-bender skills, comes in, including a very impressive kind of feat here. Azula dives in with lightning, and Ty Lee just like up close just redirects her hands away and just completely like Iroh style almost like redirects it away. And this forces the Fire Warriors to retreat because they've just full on lost this battle, but they have to leave Chio behind captive, and they just have to retreat. Azula does a very cool Zhong-Zhong-esque firewall to kind of allow them to properly retreat, with Ty Lee through it saying, "This isn't over, Azula. I'm going to find you. I won't let you get away," as they do properly get away. So I just think like this is an incredible showing for Ty Lee, and in the context of the book, I think it really shows like Ty Lee has full on 100% like found herself. Like this is full growth Ty Lee, end of story, achieving her potential, happy to be part of the Kyoshi Warriors, showing leadership and skill on a kind of level we haven't really seen before. And then this is Azula leading a failed effort for what is implied to be like the fourth or fifth time in a row, and it's just going from bad to worse for Azula. Just the contrast of these characters, I think, is really interesting to see. But what are your thoughts on the action sequence that we get here to end the kind of opening section?
Yeah, no, that's a good point to bring up, the comparison and their sort of leadership skills and how they're able to sort of, turn the tide of battle in their sort of favor here. And it definitely does, like you're saying, it feels like, this is sort of where Ty Lee sort of ends up and sort of like rest of her sort of story here. Because the battle itself is pretty cool. Like you're saying, like the fact that she's able to sort of, work up close, with all this sort of bending around, which, Ty Lee's never particularly had that much of an issue with, but, you can see sometimes where she does sort of like hesitate in certain situations. And as far as we can tell from the way that they're sort of illustrating these panels, she has no sort of like hesitation at all in any of these events. And she's, using all her acrobatic and flexibility in order to sort of dodge and evade and sort of confront in this sort of situation here. And, she's not on her own here, but she is, leading the charge here, and this definitely shows her sort of abilities here. So no, I think this was definitely a really sort of good outing for her, and even when we get to see her later on, even if it's not truly Ty Lee, it's still a pretty good showing for her as a character.
And it is interesting, just of the three kind of like Ozai's Angels Team Azula members, like you'd probably say like in the original kind of series, like Ty Lee was the kind of one that was like the least leader of them, because it felt like, even though like May could be a little bit like detached, she was sort of almost like the second in command rather than Ty Lee, because just kind of Ty Lee's personality, she almost shows so much respect to the other two that she'd just be the third one. Here she is just like leading this group, and it works perfectly for her. But then we get later, so we get the camp here in the forest with the Fire Warriors, and again, this is the important thing, like there's more of them here. So like Azula didn't bring all that was left of the Fire Warriors with her on this mission, but there's not many of them left compared to kind of what it once was. And Zirine, who we did meet in like Smoke and Shadows, she's the other named Fire Warrior. She's going around like, we have to find a way to rescue Chio. Where would they take her? What if they sent her back to the institution? And she's just like, Azula, why aren't you listening or coming up with a plan yourself? But Azula just says, we're not going back for her. Zirine again argues she's one of us, she's a Fire Warrior, but Azula just counters with the idea, and as a Fire Warrior, she should accept that sometimes there are casualties of war. And this is really good characterization of Zirine, who responds with, this isn't a war. Attacking warehouses and sabotaging food supplies to undermine Fire Lord Zuko is pathetic. You promised we'd be doing work to help the Fire Nation's downtrodden, not skulking around in the dark like criminals. This isn't what we signed up for. We're not pawns to be thrown away in this fight against your brother. We're putting ourselves in danger because of what you want, not what we all agreed to. We need to move on from undermining Fire Lord Zuko. We want to focus on other things. And we'll get Azula's reaction in a second here, but I'm like, this is actually really good writing for like Zirine as like the main fire warrior here, kind of pointing out the absolute truth of this situation of like, this isn't a war. Like what they're doing is just causing nuisances to Zuko basically. And they're completely aware that like, okay, you helped us get out of the institution, we'll follow you, you are a good leader, but it's really clear at this point that they're like, this is going on too far. We thought she'd like move on from this herself, but she's just continuing on with it, and we don't care about this anymore. And the idea that the other Fire Warriors do actually want to kind of be Robin Hood like characters, which we'll get more on in the coming pages, but like they actually want to help people, and Azula doesn't. That's the big contrast here. So probably the most characterization we've got here. Like almost you would say like these two pages have more in-depth stuff on the rest of the Fire Warriors than anything else. But what are your thoughts on this? The start of this conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. This definitely actually keys you into the Fire Wars, or at least to all of them sans Azula, what they actually, think they should be doing. Like, they've come from this institution and they feel like, they either weren't being helped there, or, the things there just wasn't enough. So they're, they actually do have, some positive ideas that they want to do. And that just doesn't coincide with what Azula, thinks that they should actually be doing in this sort of, war in her mind that, she's making, manifest in this sort of reality here in order to sort of make Zuko, in theory, to be the Fire Lord that he should actually be. And they don't really see that sort of situation here. Like that's, it doesn't really concern them, right? But so there's a clear sort of conflict there of the interests of this actual group here, which seems like it's been building up for a while now at this point.
And I think like the point here is like Zirian is correct. Like from Smoke and Shadow, you were like, it's cool that Azula feels the throne is not for her anymore, but then it's like, and oh no, that is not the correct way to go about doing this, Azula, to try and morph Zuko basically into you. So like you're acknowledging that like the throne is his, but he's not doing it right. He has to do it my way, and she doesn't get that her way is wrong, and it's this repeating cycle for her of just like not realizing that that's why she keeps losing people, which we'll get into multiple times over the course of the book. But then Azula does respond. She's like, Zirian, remind me, where were you when I found you? The institution. And so here's the explanation on the institution, which wasn't really delved into in the previous comics. You were the daughters of the Fire Nation's most traditional families, too rebellious to fit the roles your parents demanded of you. So they abandoned you to the Institute in the hopes you'd be taught humility and respect. And she's just saying, like, I freed you, you had nothing, you're nothing without me, I gave you purpose and a place to belong, that we've built something together here. I'm in charge. She kind of pulls rank on them here. I'm the leader here, and this is what we need to continue our reign of terror against that weakling on the Fire Nation throne, my dear brother Zuzu. And she just kind of forces Zirine to just like agree with her, I am being dominant here, cower before me, and Zirine is just forced to be like I can't really oppose you, so yeah, whatever you say, Azula. But I think the interesting thing here is probably just the idea that, again, keep in mind, this is a mental institution that Azula was put into. But now we get this kind of, I suppose, how it actually is used is that they're kind of pointing out these characters aren't like all crazy characters. They were put in here because of like they were slightly rebellious compared to what is expected of traditional noble family, like daughters, basically. So that is an interesting kind of point in all of this, that it speaks to like, okay, there's some stuff that needs to change within the Fire Nation, that like so much of the system but below kind of Ozai was so much of the problem, and that the fact that like Zirian has kind of come out of this on the end actually wanting to help other people kind of speaks to like, oh yeah, the others seem to have a good view on things now, free from that. They're able to actually do something, but Azula just can't see it. So what are your thoughts on Azula's response here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this feels like, sort of classic Azula
Mm,
here, right? Like her pulling rank, her manipulating the situation, her not really acknowledging what the other people are saying, just in terms of her getting her own way. So this is like, she's clearly just, it's her way or the highway,
mm,
right? In this sort of instance here. And she's trying to express this to her, her current team here in terms of, what's gonna be the great sort of outcome here. But it is interesting to sort of get the idea of where they sort of came from, and sort of, them being sort of rebellious and, not conforming to the sort of traditional roles of Fire Nation society, which, from what we know, is kind of sort of strict in terms of what they sort of expect from people. But it doesn't, like you're saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that, these other characters are off sort of like on the deep end, as sort of like what we're sort of, generally are sort of considering sort of like Azula in terms of like, the scale of their sort of mental sort of stability here. Because like you said, it does seem like, they actually do want to help people. Like they're not sort of like the type that want to sort of like, cause a rebellion or anything like that. Like they're not trying to be like the Red Lotus or anything like that. Like they're more down to earth than that. And, that could, from a nobility stance, that could be something that, they wouldn't want to be with. Like
mm.
that in itself is like, why do you want to help people below yourself? Like that doesn't that wouldn't feel normal to them, even though to anyone else that might feel like a sort of common thing to actually want to do. Like it almost feels like they're sort of like in the role of like what Toph was in before, she sort of ran away essentially.
Mm.
Like, you have to be sort of the good daughter and sort of fit this role, and then, get married and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they want to do something else.
Yeah.
Whereas Azula, she was kind of off on the deep end there, even if she does seem like she's slightly getting better there. So
Mm.
it definitely is interesting to put in perspective, like where they came from and where they sort of want to be in the end.
Yeah, like when Azula says like rebellious, like you can really imagine that like the parents of like Zirian and these other characters being like you're going here because basically you were being accused of wanting to have fun or like having different ideas, like these really
Yeah.
like mundane things that are normal, but within the structure of the nobility within the Fire Nation, that's rebellious apparently, which is quite interesting. So yeah, we just get Azula then goes into her tent and it's just like, my beautiful fire warriors, tomorrow will be a fine day to cause chaos. But they just stand there and talk to each other and they're like, she's never going to let us go. She doesn't even care what happens to us. We have to save Chio. Chio would do the same for us. She would. And the remaining like four of them hug. And the idea is that they make their decision and to leave Azula because this is what they truly want to do, is to get Chio back. And so this is where we get those the earliest preview pages for this from when it was like first announced. Azula wakes up, goes outside. The other tents are gone. She finds at least one mask discarded, and she realizes what has happened here. They have abandoned her, betrayed her, whatever word Azula is going to use to describe this. They have, she calls them traitors, and she is going to hunt them down. And this is an important thing to note with like the end of the book. This is what Azula wants to do initially. The Fire Warriors here, her group, is how could they be so ungrateful? I'll make them pay. I'll hunt them down. How dare they turn their backs? And she does view it as like she feels like what the mission that she's on is to helping the future of the Fire Nation and making Zuko into a Fire Lord worthy of the throne. But I really struggle with the idea that she's correct at all in that. But what are your thoughts here on this sequence here, Azula being left alone?
Yeah, I mean, this is like history repeating itself, right? Like this is her sort of not seeing, what's happening around her, thinking that her way is correct, and the people, that she's currently being the closest with just sort of up and disappear on her. And from her perspective of things, is her being abandoned, her being betrayed, and she needs to sort of rectify it in the most sort of like aggressive way possible, right? Like she's gonna have to, or she's going to try and sort of confront them, or at least that's what she's thinking right now. So yes, it's just sort of again what's sort of happened before, and hopefully this is where she'll realize what's actually happening.
Mm. Yeah, and again, it's that idea of like she views them as being kind of in a way weak because they are valuing saving a friend above the mission, and when actually like they're being strong, kind of leaving Azula to actually do this. That's what she doesn't get. And so yeah, we get a whole montage as she walks through the forest here, kind of searching for them. I'll make them pay. I'll make them pay. She eventually kind of slips and actually like smashes into the ground, and she gets this kind of. I think it's really meant to be this kind of full moment of like the Azula from before, like is near perfect. She would never trip walking through a forest, but she does here. Um, and we see the lightning in the background, the rain starts, and just that little panel on the bottom of 24 where she's just looking out with this kind of determined look on her face, but kind of that almost sense of like things are going wrong, like what do I do here, is really interesting for the character, because there's a clear, I think, reference with this book. This is following a similar path to kind of like Zuko alone, and that section of Zuko's arc. And we're doing that sort of stuff here. We're like, okay, she's on her own now. Here's a little bit of a journey that she goes on. She'll learn something along the way. That's kind of what's happening here, and we kind of know that. So interesting stuff. But then off in the distance, she spots a temple. And she's kind of like, I didn't know there were any like fire sage temples out here. And the idea is ultimately that there aren't. It's a spirit temple. Like I think we learned like at the very end of the comic that like it's not a temple that really like exists in a way. Like Azula at this point is almost, she's already in the vision to a certain degree at this point. But that's what happens here, and she basically walks in the door, and we'll cover that in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the little kind of montage of Azula's journey through the forest as she finds the temple?
Yeah, this is sort of like their moment of trying to bring, Azula down to earth here, because, she's focused on making them pay, and she's not finding them in any sort of way. And we do know that because she's sort of stuck in this essentially like a spirit loop at this point here, and she's going to have to confront something. But it definitely, it feels like she's almost at the point here, to sort of realize things aren't necessarily going her way. But she's, from her facial here, you can see that she's still sort of like upset and not really willing to sort of let anything sort of even begin to go. And if it wasn't for sort of the little grumble that they have in her stomach here, she might not even still sort of go to this temple, regardless of it sort of being out there in her way.
So yeah, she walked in, she sees the solitary monk listed on the back of the book, and she's like, "You're not a fire sage." And this person is just like, she says, "A traveler, like, welcome, welcome. What is this place?" And keeping in mind that like it will be revealed in short time that this character, a spirit, just in a form. This is a place of refuge, of rest for the weary. And Azula's like, well, why is it here in a place where like no one would ever really find it? Those who need this place have no problem finding it. You look like you've been struggling with great troubles of late and are in need of help. And Azula's just like, that's nonsense. I just need a meal and a warm bed for the night. What is this about troubles? And this is the key point. Is like, it's Zirian and the others who have troubles. They'll pay for their betrayal. And she's just ushered in, and please stay for the night. Continue your journey in the morning. And then a notable line again is, you will have good dreams in this place of sacred rest. And she just gets like a mat rolled out on the floor. And she's like, you expect me to sleep on the floor like a stray dog? And she's like, what about that room? Let me go in there. And she's like, oh, no, that's my room. But Azula, of course, takes command here. She's the princess. She, of course, wants the best room. How can you be so selfish for keeping this from me? And the spirit ultimately is like, okay, whatever. I'm happy to do whatever is required to facilitate your stay. At least it's clean. So Azula goes to sleep in this room, and then interestingly on the end of page 29 we get sort of the stuff that's kind of on the cover, the kind of like threads of smoke kind of coming over that are kind of representative of like this spirit's like powers almost like activating. as she falls asleep and is going to have these kind of like a peaceful, sacred rest. She's going to have these good dreams. That's what she's about to be shown. But yeah, just before we get into the start of this vision, what are your thoughts on the first encounter here with the solitary monk?
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, it's interesting because you can tell that there's like something off about the situation, even if you don't sort of have the foresight of what's actually going to happen here. But, it feels like one of those things that is just sort of set up for the character to sort of confront with their sort of problems here. But you can see even from the beginning here that Azula's not even, willing to sort of, have any sort of, stay on sort of what she feels is her actual sort of problems here. Like you can see that the spirit, the monk here is sort of, trying to sort of like put it in her mind that, things can be better, things can be sort of relaxed here. You can sort of figure out how things are going to work out. But Azula still seems like she's still sort of such on sort of edge here, and still has her sort of core personality here of even being in sort of like a random location, which most people would you would think they would have the humility to sort of like take anything in terms of like finding a random place to sort of stay. But Azula just even if she was just previously in the middle of a forest sleeping in a tent, still has the idea in herself that everything should be hers to sort of command, which seems weird from like a random person's perspective, but not from Azula's perspective here. And even when she's going to sleep here, she still has the idea of making things pay. So you can see how that's going to sort of affect anything that comes after the fact.
Mm-hmm. And then like even just the kind of rough explanation that we get here about like in a way like why Azula is affected by the powers of this spirit, that like this spirit has like assessed her and judged that like, oh, she is someone who is dealing with troubles, who needs to find this place, who needs to experience this sacred rest. And like for anyone like kind of in a way like wondering, is there an Azula arc here about like redemption? Well, a spirit analyzing her seems to think so, certainly. So it's this nice kind of confirmation of that. But then we get into the vision here. So we're finally into the actual visions here. Some of the early, the other preview pages. So Azula then wakes up, and as she goes through the curtain, she's not in the spirit temple anymore. She's on Ember Island, and it's Lo and Lee, and they bring her outside, and as her vision clears as she goes outside into the sunlight, she is met with this crazy scene out here on the beach. It's full Fire Nation royal family fun times on the beach, and it's this ideal version of what Azula wants, basically. So here in this shot we have, I'm guessing it's meant to be Sozin and Azula still alive in the background. We have happy couple, I guess, Ursa and Ozai, non-scarred Zuko, Iroh's, and then instead of Chan, we have Ranjan, the other guy from the beach. And so they all say things that she would want to hear. Ozai says, "My favorite child." Iroh praises her for being the conqueror of Ba Sing Se. Zuko says, "You killed the Avatar. You ended the war." Ursa says, "You were named Fire Lord after your father ascended to Phoenix King." And then it's revealed here, Ranjan is her boyfriend, and he says, "Your hair is amazing and you smell great." And she's just incredibly confused by all of this. And she's like, wait, this isn't right. The Avatar's alive. I'm struggling to remember what's going on here. Ursa comes over and hugs her, saying how proud she is. She actually says it twice. And then we get an interruption saying, this isn't real. And we'll cover that in just a second. But what are your thoughts on this kind of ideal Fire Nation family pick?
I mean, yeah, in terms of idealness, this is like, almost anything or everything that she could want in sort of the best case scenario, even though, it can't really feasibly actually work that way. But it's a nice idea, and it's like the best case of all the certain things here. I mean, just the fact that we see everyone is sort of happy and sort of smiling is sort of, is so different than what we sort of would typically sort of imagine, even on like the best case scenario of things. So it's definitely, I can see why it would be sort of so shocking for Azula to see this, let alone, any, us as viewers seeing this, especially sort of like out of context. It definitely sort of strikes against everything that we sort of have been led to believe so far.
And what's so interesting about all of this is that obviously this is kind of what she wants, but she also does herself point out that though this isn't real, I know you are not like that. I know that's not real. So like there's some interesting things that people have pointed out that it's very interesting that her ideal version of her family does include a non-scarred Zuko, obviously suggesting that whole incident never actually happened. Some people have been like, wait, is it not an error that shouldn't Chan be there instead of Ranjan? My logic behind that is that she can't have completely different people be her family. Her uncle is Iroh. It can't be some other random guy. But in terms of the boyfriend kind of slot here, these were two people that she met very briefly in that one episode, and in a way, why would she imagine the person who abandoned her once she revealed the real her to him would be there? Whereas this is kind of what if I chose the other one? No, he wouldn't have acted the same way. He would acknowledge the real me. That's kind of my logic behind the shift in those two characters. But definitely the most notable thing here is just the idea that her ideal version of Ursa is this almost very simplistic version of she just constantly says how proud she is, which is obviously what Azula deep down wants and is part of the issue between them. But it gets into sort of the idea of why that was never kind of realistic within the family, why this can never be the case at all because of what the reality of the Fire Nation family is, and the fact that competitiveness between siblings, literally forcing them to kind of in a way fight against each other to be the best is what is part of this. This is why Iroh and Ozai don't really have a relationship. This is part of why Zuko and Azula don't get on as well. That's what's kind of really interesting here, is that the only one who's kind of accurate here is Ozai, because in this book, even though she says some interesting things about Ozai, she still says that he's the only one who's not a traitor within the family. So interesting stuff. But do you have any other thoughts on this ideal page?
Yeah, no, that is interesting that he is the one that's sort of on par in terms of character. Now, it still feels like he's too positive in this one, regardless, or even when we see it later on. But that would fit, I guess, sort of the character, as far as being the favorite child out of the two of them, right, and sort of their history and their backing. But yes, I don't know. There's definitely something to sort of get into sort of the mind of Azula, and sort of if everything went well, how would it actually work out?
So on the next page, we get the revelation that the person who said, this isn't real, is Mei and Ty Lee. So they're also here, but with them, it's the very realistic version of them. It's a complete opposite of these are the two people who kind of betrayed you. These are the two people who oppose you. As if your mom would ever be proud of you. Mei says, didn't you tell us she thought you were a monster? Pretty suspicious. And Azula just says, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Mei says, sure I do. I know the real you, Azula. None of this actually happened. And then Azula gets angry here and says, I said, shut up. And the kind of tendrils of the spirit, in a way, turn dark in this moment. This breaks the kind of sacred dreams vision. Azula wakes up, the solitary monk comes in and is freaking out that they didn't give you peace, you've got to leave right now. And my interpretation of this is definitely the idea of this is this spirit realizing, oh, your emotions are turning me dark. You don't want to be here continuing to experience these dreams when I'm in my dark form, because then they'll go from attempting to bring you peace to basically what we get, and it's sort of the roast of Azula almost. It's we're going to, criticize you. You will be criticized, and it will be a kind of a negative experience rather than an experience attempting to be positive. But what are your thoughts on this and your interpretation on why the spirit freaks out at this?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Is the spirit aware of that, because this didn't work in the best case scenario, that it's, I'm going to be a reflection of you in sort of the worst case scenario. I don't know. That definitely is one way to sort of take it. And then, I don't know, I also thought that maybe this was just sort of a ploy of maybe just sort of forcing, Azula in another way to actually sort of, confront the situation that she's, trying to sort of deal with and everything. Like, is this sort of like another way of, forcing them to confront, or forcing Azula to confront her issues, even if she's not in sort of the best case scenario dream method. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe it could go either way, but it definitely feels like she's stuck in this sort of loop because her emotions are just too skewed, and the spirit doesn't have the ability to sort of combat this sort of issue here. So either way is not going to work out well.
And I suppose while we're at this point, this is kind of like the shift in terms of how the visions actually happen. Like, what's your interpretation on how this was actually kind of like meant to go? Like, if Azula and May didn't turn up here, like, because I get the impression like it's not just that the spirit is meant to sort of like convince her to be good using these kind of obviously like fake visions. So I'm assuming it would have been this kind of slow process of her realizing it's not real and kind of assessing within herself like why it's not real and getting her to a better place in that way. But the negativity in a way within her draws out this more, okay, we need to address the other side of things more so than this one. Because that seems to be the way it works, is that like if you come in here and you're struggling and you succeed in the dreams, you'll wake up and be back on the right path. Like you'll be kind of on the road to redemption. Like you know within yourself what it is that you need to do. And obviously it doesn't work with Azula over the course of the entire book. But the stuff is all there for her to have potentially made the right decision. But so what are your thoughts on that? How is it meant to have worked out if it would work properly for Azula?
Yeah, no, that's a good point there. Because I mean, if this was best case scenario and she woke up from this sort of mini spiritual journey, would she have realized the error of her ways? Would this have been like the best case way of her sort of another way of her starting? Because I mean, I think we still do get some of that by the end of this, but it just went towards the negative first before it could actually get to the positive. Would this have been essentially like a shortcut for her realizing the error of her ways essentially here? I don't know. I think that probably could have been a way, because I don't think it's something along the lines of like the fog of lost souls, where you would have been like stuck in this sort of dream world, even though we have the mist and all this other stuff all around the place, which could sort of indicate that sort of idea of things. And I think the mist does seem to get her stuck as we go over the next couple of pages, but it feels like there's this spirit at least has more the sort of like better intentions. I wonder if it's sort of related to sort of the fog of lost souls in some sort of way.
Yeah, because they kind of do similar things. They're almost like opposites in a way. Like the fog of lost souls makes you remember your worst moment. This kind of brings them up, but with the aim of making you better. But it is interesting that like before things go dark, there's still the May and Ty Lee bit that comes in. So I'm guessing it's more so the idea that like Azula's first response to the this isn't real is to be very kind of viscerally like angry, like no, I don't want to discuss this, because she doesn't want to engage. It like doubly kind of like activates that no, you are going to be forced to have to explore this. So that's what happens here. She tries to leave the temple. She walks out into the mist surrounding it, but then suddenly she's like, oh, I think I'm free. But then when she looks up again, it's just the spirit temple again. And so the only place she can go is back in. And she's convinced that this woman, the monk, is just kind of trying to keep her here against her will. So she's like, oh, I'm going to go in and show her the true meaning of fear. And when she walks back in, the spirit is there freaking out. It's wrong. It's all gone wrong. You can see the dark tendrils kind of coming in all over the place. Azula asks again, what is this? This is a place of refuge, of hope for the weary. Azula just says, it's a trap set by my enemies. That's what it is. I've got to find a way out. She thinks like, this is an Azuko plan. Maybe it's the Avatar. But the spirit continues to freak out. Please, you must leave. You did not find peace in your dreams. I cannot control what happens next. What are you talking about? Is this more tricks? As another vision begins at this point. So definitely the key point here is that whatever has happened with Azula and her refusing to engage in this darkness beginning, the spirit is now out of control. It can't truly guide Azula along this path. It's just whatever's going to happen here is whatever's going to happen. You're trapped and there's nothing I can do. Her powers have kind of gone out of line because, as we know with spirits, the emotions of humans can affect them, and that's clearly what's happening. So just before we get into this next vision, what are your thoughts on this little sequence here in the mist and coming back in?
Yeah, I don't. This is definitely pretty intriguing, just in terms of Azula's sort of, she's already on her warpath here, right? Like she's already figuring that this is a trick, this is a trap, this is something that someone's doing against her, because Azula's general mindset is that it's all about her, right? Like she's there's very little space for other people in her way of thinking, and this definitely feels like something's coming out to get her. And like you said, spirits are affected by sort of their environments and people's emotions, and this one was trying to connect with Azula in order to help her, but it's her mind is just not ready for that sort of being open in any sort of situation here. So you can see it's warping the space around her.
The next scene is really interesting, probably one of my favorites of the book. We get a new flashback scene from Azula's childhood. She looks on the ground and sees this turtle duck toy that's burned. She picks it up and is like, I remember this. She looks up and her mother's there. And it's, Azula, what are you doing? And when we see this from Ursa's perspective, it's her looking at a young Azula. The reveal here is that this is the first time Azula ever firebends. So she's just kind of playing, and somehow she sets Turtle Duck Toy on fire. And so this is Ursa discovering this before anyone else. And Azula's like, oh, did I do something wrong? Ursa's like, you were firebending. Ozai pops up behind Ursa. She was firebending, and he's happy because obviously she's discovered it at such a young age. She seems to be in somewhat control of it. He says she's a prodigy to be bending at such a young age. This is wonderful, Azula. And Azula's happy because Ozai picks her up at this point, and he's like, he has his prodigal firebender that he's always wanted. And Ozai looks back at Ursa and is like, tell your daughter how amazing she is, Ursa. Tell her how proud you are. And Azula looks over at her mother, but her mother can only give this kind of half smile that has so much concern. I think it's an incredibly drawn expression for Ursa in the middle of 41 that gets so much emotion across here. And Azula's like, what's wrong? Like, why aren't you just happy? This is a happy moment, isn't it? And she just kind of kisses her on the forehead and is like, you are your father's daughter, Azula. And then we get this super interesting kind of page where it's like a cracked mirror. And then on one side, basically, is the truth of what happened, that concerned expression from Ursa. On the other is this is the ideal world. This is the reaction from Ursa you wanted. It's this like super happy, peppy reaction. I'm so proud of you. It's almost like disconcerting how happy Ursa is in that kind of version. And again, we continue with that ideal version. What a special girl, firebending at such a young age. A rare talent. You're a powerful bender, Azula, the greatest the Fire Nation has ever seen. Everything you ever wanted will be yours. She's happy. But then we cut to present day Azula looking at this, and she's like, wait, that's not what happened. My mother wasn't happy. I was a firebender. She was afraid. Afraid for me, afraid of me, wasn't she? And this is a super interesting discussion up to now. What are your thoughts on this interesting kind of flashback scene slash?
Yeah, this is a good, I don't know, it's an interesting way that they chose to sort of illustrate sort of what happened versus what she wants to happen. And, it's the whole sort of spirit's idea of sort of giving you what you really want, right? In terms that it'll hopefully put you in sort of a better place, or at least that's what we're assuming here. So to see how this, played out and could have played out, is very, I guess, sort of eye-opening in terms of, sort of her sort of upbringing and sort of her sort of initial sort of experience for, considering this sort of like a true half flashback from when she first sort of learned, that she was a firebender. So yeah, definitely, it's something to see sort of how this sort of happened, and, how this is just so in conflict and odds with what she really wanted in her life growing up.
And I think that's the point here, is that, like, you can look at this scene like two different ways, from like Ursa's perspective and from Azula's perspective, because from Azula's perspective, like in the moment, she is like confused about, why is my mom not happy when I'm excited to be a firebender, my dad is excited for me to be a firebender, because she doesn't at that moment, and even maybe even fully right now, understand like Ursa's position within the family, the story that we know from the search, and that she doesn't get like what that expression is. But at the end of it, like, the idea that like she does sort of know, but she kind of still has some conflict over it. Like, she was afraid for me, she was afraid of me, like, which one was it? I think if you know the character of Ursa, you know it's for me, because I think what the kind of half smile that I kind of pointed out earlier on, that's very much this idea of like, her as a mother kind of being like, I can't just like no sell this moment because I want to be good to my daughter, but also it's Ursa realizing, oh, this is the moment I lose her to Ozai. Like, there's nothing in my power I can really do to stop his influence from being completely on her after this point, because he has decided, he has seen she is the prodigal firebender. I'm worried about what is going to happen from this point on. And so, you have the reality from Ursa's point of view, but then you also get the view from Azula of like, she did just want her mother to care, but because of the situation within the family, it's utterly unrealistic. And that's the whole conflict here, of like just realizing that the family unit here is messy. It's super, super messy, and it was never going to be this ideal thing, and that like even Zuko would have some sort of a perfect ideal version of his family that is different from the way it actually is. That Azula, it's just the idea of like the accepting the truths about the family. And it mainly comes down to, I suppose, Ozai. That Ozai is the problem within the family, and even before that, like just the way things went with the, Ozai's father before him, Azulan's father, Sozin's father. What caused the family to become like the evil line of Fire Lords as we went forward. I think there's a lot of depth in this one that I think really, really interesting. But we do go on and we get the explanation from the spirit here. So it's like, I'm just trying to give you what you want. Why do you think I wanted a false vision? Isn't your greatest desire to be loved and embraced by your family? Why can't you just accept what is offered? And Azula says, you want me to accept your lies and manipulations? If it helps you find peace, why not? You're no monk, and this is where we get the reveal fully. This is a spirit. The true stuff from the cover kind of comes out here. The almost eye-looking kind of symbols comes out. It's revealed that this is some sort of like demon-looking kind of monk human form here. But it's also super interesting because, it's Azula kind of being like, no, stop showing me the ideal versions of this. I don't want the lies. But I think the spirit was correct initially when it says that your greatest desire is to be loved and embraced by your family. I think that is the truth, but she just doesn't like accept it in this moment, because we go through this trying to find out what it is that she wants, and she'll say yes to something, but it's a hesitant, yes. So it's just really interesting the whole way through. But what are your thoughts on the aftermath of the flashback?
Yeah, I mean, I think Azula, she's, even though she has a skewed perception of things, like she tries to see things for what they really are. So the fact that she, doesn't want to see these lies that someone else is giving her, it kind of makes sense because Azula is the one who does the manipulation and the lies, right? So like to see someone else try to do it on her, that's something that she just can't accept because, it's gotta be sort of her way of doing things. So she, pretty, actively, confronts this sort of issue here. And that's when we, like you said, we really get sort of the reveal and sort of this sort of odd monk creature that's able to sort of hang upside down by by their hands and their feet and stuff like that. So that completely sort of changes the dynamic of this sort of spiritual sort of journey that she's sort of trapped on right now, that she still doesn't have a full grasp on what's actually going on.
And after some initial shock, she does just take up a fighting stance against the spirit and is like, I don't need anything from my family. They're all traitors, all of them, except my father. But now he's a pathetic shadow of his former self. His bending is gone, taken by the Avatar. And we know from like the search, I think it's mainly the search, she says like she doesn't really care too much about her father anymore because he's weak, because he doesn't have his bending. Again, the kind of skewed view on power. But she still, at this point, is kind of making the point that like, oh, he's different than the others because in a way he was always there, like with her. I think it's a bit of a stretch to say like for her, but like he didn't directly betray her, but like in all that attention that she got, did she actually get what she wanted from Ozai is probably one of the kind of deeper questions that we kind of don't really even fully tackle here. So what are your thoughts on just those kind of two panels there of her talking?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense because, Ozai didn't go against her. He was just forced to give up on, his goals, his situation and everything like that. Like he didn't really have a say in what he was doing. But, from Azula's perspective, that's like a plus, but he can't help her. He can't do anything for her. He just sort of put her on this path that would have wound up in like the best case scenario if it had worked out, but obviously it didn't.
And I think in relation to like all the visions, like I completely get the idea that like it's probably truthful that he probably numerous times said he was proud of her. But I think what we know about Ozai is that like, did he ever really like love her? Because I think we know that from like the end of Smoke and Shadow, like what Ursa says to Ozai is that like, you don't care about people, like you have no love in your heart basically for anyone in your family, like brother, children, anyone. And I think that's the thing. It's like, when will she kind of finally realize that like the details about her interaction with Ozai, and that like he didn't like directly openly betray you like as happened potentially with other characters, but did he actually give you what you wanted? And it's like, no, he kind of in a way thought you to want other things that are different than what you actually want, and we'll get into some of that here shortly. Interestingly, she then says, I'm the only one left with any claim to the Fire Nation throne. The spirit says, oh, the last true Fire Lord. Yes, I will have what's owed to me. And the spirit, at this point, even more of a spirit at this point, says, don't fret, little Fire Lord. I have a feeling you'll get what's coming to you. There's a knock at the door, and in walks Ty Lee, and it's just like, oh, hi, Azula. And it's like, it's kind of almost creepy the way she walks in and is just super happy about this. Because Azula's immediately like, what? Are you not like weirded out by all the spirit stuff happening here? And she knows something is up here. But I do find it interesting that it's even addressed at the start of the book. Like, she still has this whole thing about wanting the Fire Warriors to force Zuko to be the one, the leader that she wants. But now she's saying, actually, I'm the one who should be the Fire Lord. And I think there's a little bit of like constantly throughout this, it's the idea of, does Azula actually know what she wants? So when she says this, how particularly strong does she mean here? Where is this her resetting her goals as, no, actually, I'll be the Fire Lord again? I don't really think that's the case. I think it's like it's not the truth of what she really wants. It's just this is kind of one of the things I'm expecting. But what are your thoughts on what she says here?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because she's sort of going back and forth. It seemed like she had an idea of what she wanted the Fire Nation to be through Zuko, right? Like he needed to become this sort of Fire Lord that was sort of reminiscent of like sort of her ideas as well as like her father. But now it seems like she's being confronted with a bunch of different ideas and sort of her own past, and now maybe she's thinking that things should be sort of different. So it's almost like she's sort of like retreading on things that we sort of thought that she was already okay with, but we can see that even that is still she doesn't really have that sort of figured out, and maybe that's just because she's having to confront with more issues, and she's lost some people that she thought she was sort of in with, that she's she doesn't really have this situation sort of figured out. And even with one of her friends, or spiritually one of her friends sort of coming back, is sort of making her question everything all over again, which I think is sort of the whole point of the spirit, just that now it's just taking a darker tone to things.
So yeah, we get a conversation back and forth between Azula and Vision Ty Lee. Again, it's not the real Ty Lee here, but what the spirit says at the end is that like these representations, they don't lie directly to, but like you can't maybe fully interpret it as like it's exactly what Ty Lee would say, but it's mostly accurate. So it's an interesting one in terms of the interpretation. So initially the Ty Lee kind of tries to convince her that like, oh yeah, I tracked you through the forest here. I am actually the real Ty Lee. I'm here. What a coincidence. All roads lead to Azula. Maybe I just like chasing you around. It's my new hobby. And they're like, oh, well, what's the spirit doing up there? What's that about? There's a weird like energy around this place. Do you want me to read your aura? But Azula's just like, stop all that. Just fight me. And so they have a fight. But Azula does immediately then begin to talk, which is interesting. That stupid dress is really slowing you down. Remind me why you're wearing it. Because I joined the Kyoshi Warriors and this is what they wear. Why did you join that band of losers? We walked all over them back when we were hunting the Avatar. That was a good fight. And Ty Lee says, all I remember from that time was constant stress and anxiety. My aura was a mess. And Azula responds, oh, shut up, you loved it. You were a team. We were a team, you, me, and May. And then May had to ruin it all for stupid Zuzu. It makes me so mad. She broke up our team for a stupid boy who didn't even want her. And Ty Lee's just like, it's not healthy to be obsessed with other people's relationships. Maybe you should get some help. And Azula freaks out at this point. Don't tell me what to do. And she kind of finishes the fight, kicking Ty Lee against the door. And she kind of like ties her up and is really struggling with what on earth is happening here. She's being kind of like challenged by a lot of what's going on here. But this is an interesting one. A lot of the initial stuff is just like, okay, trying to make it seem real. But the idea of Azula still fundamentally doesn't understand, like, why would you ever join a different group that we were stronger than? And why are you happy and better there than you were as part of our team? And she can't accept the truth that, well, like, how did that team form? Like, did I initially agree and was super happy to join? And the reality is that, like, yeah, Ty Lee was struggling at times as part of that kind of team. That there was a lot of stress and anxiety because if she went against Azula, we know how she acts. And then she kind of turns her attention to like May and the specifics of the kind of Boiling Rock betrayal of like she did it because her love for Zuko was more than her kind of fear for Azula. It's very interesting, a lot of what's going on. You can tell it's coming back to a super significant thing for Azula is kind of fundamentally, why did you leave me to May and Ty Lee? Best friends, her team. She's really still broken by, because that moment was the thing that really set her on that path towards the end of ATLA. But what are your thoughts on this conversation with Spirit Vision Ty Lee?
Yeah, no, I think that's That's, her idea of people leaving her and being betrayed, and sort of, the treacherous act of the people that she, considered the closest to her is, probably her largest sort of hang up here. And, it just keeps getting brought back and forth into her face here. And it doesn't seem like it's something that she's willing to sort of, dive into deeply in any sort of way. She's just sort of brushing forward, and even by the end of things, it still feels like she's, pushing forward towards something that even her herself doesn't really know what that really is. And she doesn't know how to get help for herself. Even if she was, potentially in a place where she could have gotten help, she wasn't willing to let that go at all. And that's sort of what she's essentially saying to herself here, with the help of the spirit sort of visualizing this.
But then we get a very interesting kind of scene here. The spirit comes up to Azula on the ground and is just like, are you going to kill her, like, now that you've captured her? And Azula's response is like shocked. It's like, huh? Why would I do that? And the spirit's just like, I'm trying to figure out what you want. It really doesn't get it. Like, well, you wanted to fight her, now you've captured her. I thought you wanted, like, revenge against the people who betrayed you. Because that's what she was effectively saying at the start with, like, the Fire Warriors, that she'll make them pay. But in what way? Because I would take this overall as, like, the revenge she wants against the people who betrayed her is not that she just wants to kill them. She's not that kind of crazy, just wanting to take them out. And that's kind of good to know, that it isn't that for any people who are kind of wondering, like, oh, but wait, isn't Azula just a villain? Stuff like this is why you highlight why it's not, is that the idea is she is shocked at the mere concept of a suggestion that she would kill Ty Lee, because she still cares about her, even if she doesn't understand, like, her true feelings about, like, Ty Lee and what happened and stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on that? The spirit struggling to understand what Azula wants.
Yeah, I mean, there's no surprise the spirit's struggling. Azula's struggling herself, right? So, like, it's just like a double here of, not understanding herself. The spirit's not able to sort of decipher her, and that just sort of continues to sort of spiral in the situation. And yeah, she doesn't want to kill Ty Lee because, she does know Ty Lee. Like, she's not, at least towards at least people that she knows of, she's not that sort of heartless in that. Like, would there be other situations where she might do that? Yeah, maybe, probably, I don't know, but not in this sort of case here. That's not really what she wants to do here. She's just, trying to, it feels like this is the moment where she's really trying to sort of figure things out, but she's not ready to do that.
Then I guess the vision changes here from basically like Ty Lee to Ursa, and Azula's a bit like wary of like her mother being the next kind of like vision. It's like, no, this isn't real. You're not real. You can't be real. Ursa comes in for the hug, hugs her, and it's like, what's real in this place is forever changing, Azula. For now, I'm real enough. And very interesting from Azula, she says, you ruined me. How so? You chose Zuko over me. You saved him by helping to poison Grandfather Azulon, and then you left. You abandoned me. You weren't there to protect me from Dad. So I became what he wanted, his deadly firebending. I didn't have a choice. If you just let Dad kill Zuko, you could have stayed with me. You would have protected me from him. I wouldn't be this. And the vision says, what are you? Alone? Betrayed? Betrayed over and over by my brother, my uncle, my friends, my acolytes. They should have been loyal to me to the very end, but they weren't. This is all your fault. And so the vision, Ursa, is like, oh, I think I figured it out. Like, so what you want most in the world is for those who broke your trust, your family, your friends, your acolytes, to return and ask your forgiveness. For them to acknowledge how they hurt you and promise never to do so again. And the spirit's like, got it, finally. But then Azula's like ... Pause in the answer, yes. And this is when May pops up to oppose this, as we'll see in just a second. But this is like obviously super interesting. Like I think for a lot of people, this is sort of the biggest revelation in the book, because it's the first time Azula ever like, I suppose, truly, it's like a true criticism of Ozai, a true acknowledgement of the negativity of being raised by Ozai, is that if you had shielded me from him more, I wouldn't be like this. He has made me into this, like, where I don't know all this stuff about myself. Now, obviously, it's a kind of unrealistic expectation here to a certain degree of, like, the fact that she does include in this, if you just let Dad kill Zuko, like, Ursa was never going to do that. Like, let one of your children die just to assist the other, where there is a scenario where both live, and that's just the tragedy of the family and the sense of, like, you know some of the Ursa backstory. Do you know it all? And again, looking at it from both sides, like, what is the situation? But what are your thoughts on this big moment in the book?
Yeah, no, this is something to see, to, for Azula to sort of, get off her chest what she thought would be the best case scenario. Like, could she have really been shielded if she was sort of, the only child there without Zuko there? I don't know if that would have, really worked out the best case scenario. I think it probably still would have been even worse, and there would have only been one child in the Fire Lord position there. So I don't know. There's definitely, from her perspective, what she feels could have been the best case scenario, and she at least sees that there was some manipulation going on with her own sort of upbringing. So it is a realization of sorts here, but it's still sort of skewed by what she thinks would have been the best for her and herself, not for her family, which is tragic. Like, the whole situation is pretty tragic. I don't think there's any way around that. But this sort of way of it becoming the best case scenario is something that even her herself, kind of feels wouldn't necessarily work out in the end, which is where you sort of get the conflict at the last scene.
It's sort of the idea of, like, if Ozai raising you in that way made you this way, if you're aware enough of that, like, in a way, just take the next step forward and, like, change, like, go against his teachings, what you knew from him. And that is probably the situation where, like, what she needs is for the people close to her to be in her life to support her as she makes those steps. But until she makes some step in the right direction, she kind of can't fix things with those close to her. And that is the interesting thing, because, like, there's so much, like, real stuff from Azula here. Like, they bold, obviously, the term, like, then you left. So obviously the idea, the Ursa leaving was a huge moment that, even though in many of the content that we've seen before, it doesn't seem like it has had that big of an effect on Azula, it actually really has. It's almost the idea of, like, a day or two after Ursa left, and, like, they realized she wasn't coming back. Like, did Azula have an emotional moment to that? How did that go down? Obviously, it's a big moment. They also bold the word, like, choice, which obviously she didn't have a choice. It was like, well, if I don't do this, Ozai will kind of give out to me, and this is the only person kind of close to me. That's just the complexity of the family dynamic. But she does feel alone and betrayed. They emphasize that as well. And then, yeah, the doubt over the idea of what you want most is for basically the people who betrayed you to come back, kind of like begging for your forgiveness. And it's like, she says yes because I think she thinks that's what the sort of full Azula persona would ask for. I will never admit any wrongdoing, those who are wrong. But the pause, I think, definitely emphasizes that she knows she's at fault, and it, like, that needs to be her apologizing to them, or some sort of a two-way apology type thing going on. What are your thoughts on that? The kind of paused response saying yes to that as this is what you want.
Yeah, no, I think it's more of her sort of subconscious sort of, understanding the situation that, isn't so sort of straightforward in the best case scenario for herself. Like, there's more factors going on in this sort of situation. Now, does that mean that she'll ever really acknowledge that and really change? I don't know. Maybe not. But she seems like she's understanding of the situation. Like, she's smart. Like, she, even if, she's smart for all the wrong reasons most of the time, like, she understands what's happening, even if it's sort of like after the fact. Like, maybe as a child, like, it's hard to control things. Like, you're just super impressionable. But, it seems like she's developed enough, as, a person with her own sort of intelligence, that she can sort of, see the other side of things. It's just sort of getting to the point where this is something that she herself actually wants to act on and is above, everything else, and, maybe has this support structure in place, like you're saying, to actually, facilitate this actual change. But it's not here.
And so the person to kind of step in to stop Azula going down this path is May. So tied up Ty Lee turns into May, also tied up. And it's like, oh, please. You can't seriously believe you're the victim here. And, of course, this is a shock to see this change happen directly in front of her. Really, she's the spirit trickery too. And the spirit's just like, just keep going. I'm not playing your games anymore. She doesn't want to deal with this at all. She tries to leave again, but the only path is to actually go through this vision and confront what's actually there. And so at this point, we're getting into the, like, okay, here are the conclusions from kind of like the vision from the characters. I've got a theory, Azula. There's something about you that makes people want to betray you. Maybe you're a terrible person who gets what she deserves. And Azula's like stunned, like, how dare you? But then it switches back to Ty Lee. Who else would I be? And Azula's really struggling with these constant switches of all these characters she does care about. Let me see what's real. Ty Lee's just like, I am real, Azula, on the ground. You're not. I didn't believe any of what was going on. But Ty Lee says, you believe a lot of nonsense, like that we're actually friends, despite you threatening my life to force me to join your avatar hunt. What life? You're a nobody circus freak when I found you. Both you and May, complete losers. Happy losers, though. I loved that circus. And Azula kind of justifying this is like, I gave you the chance to do something important instead of wasting your days performing for crowds of peasants. And now look at you. Once you had the ear of Fire Nation royalty, now you're running errands for a pathetic group of fan dancers. You're less than nothing. And, Ursa reacts to this. The spirit reacts to this. It switches back to May again. This is getting old. And it's like, that's what's so sad about you, Azula. You tell the people around you that they're nothing without you, that they can't survive without you. And she says, well, they can't. And now it switches to Zuko. And we'll get to this in a second. We're getting towards the kind of finale a little. But again, another section kind of reflecting on the whole Ty Lee recruitment, and specifically like taking her from the circus, and the idea of like Ty Lee is like, she was happy there, and she was. Like, there's a reason she left to be there. And she was forced, basically, to do this. Like, the way Azula acted during the performance, like, Ty Lee kind of didn't really have another choice to make. And again, it's the idea of, like, it's Azula justifying treating her that way. That, like, my opinion on your life means more than your opinion on your life. But what are your thoughts on this back and forth?
Yeah, no, Azula's opinion is sort of like king in all of these instances here. She can't get it through her head that anyone else would be happy, even if they're losers, and from her sort of perspective here. And they're her Ty Lee's sort of standing before Azula came back into her life is just so beneath what she's here, that she doesn't have any sort of standing, which I don't know, I would say that she probably has higher standing now than she did before. But from Azula's perspective, that's not where she's at here. And just sort of this situation here is sad, as far as from what they're sort of getting across here, that she's these people are always sort of going in against Azula, and she can't see anyone else's other perspective.
So yeah, like I said, it switches to Zuko at this point. Don't try to fool yourself, Azula. And she's like, oh, you're Zuko now. What's next, Iroh? And Zuko says, you surround yourself with people to manipulate and harm because you can't stand the idea of facing the world alone. And Zuko now morphs into basically like the spirit, the elements that the spirit has, the weird teeth and stuff like that begin to come out. Zuko says, being alone would mean you have to deal with all the horrible things you've done, the way you've hurt the people who cared for you. And Azula is like just watching this kind of transformation, what's being said to her here, just like a little bit stunned. And we get the kind of almost like finishing blow of like, you're alone, Azula, no one to blame but yourself. Will you ask for forgiveness? As like it's a full-on like spirit morphed Zuko asking this question to a kind of terrified Azula, and she just closes her eyes. There's a scream from the Ursa vision, like Azula, as she lightning bends at this Zuko monster, takes it out basically. This big surprise of like, what did you do? I can't believe that you did this. Azula's just like, I'm done with this completely, you know, I'm finished with this lies and everything that's happened here. And this is what effectively reveals the kind of true form of the spirit, which we'll get to in a second. But interesting kind of point here of just like the point that they're kind of making over the whole book is the idea Azula needs to have people around her. She wants to have people around her, but until she admits the truth about why she wants that, it only comes across basically right now as you want those people around you so you don't have to self-reflect and realize the way you actually treat people. This is why you always act as sort of like the commander of groups of people in these situations. Never really open yourself up to them, and that like, are they true friendships, true relationships, and why aren't they that way? And it's this, again, that contradiction of like, she needs people in her life that she cares about, but never kind of responds in the way needed to kind of keep these and again, it comes back to the idea of, will you ask for forgiveness? You sort of said yes to, that's what you want other people to, but this is the sort of, literally this is the question. If you say yes, you can start your path to redemption right now. But she obviously says no, basically. But what are your thoughts on what the Zuko...
No, she's not ready to sort of be in this alone sort of state where she really has to sort of confront all her fears and sort of realize that, you know, like Zuko's saying here, that there really is no one else to blame, you know, than herself, which, you know, that might not be entirely true. And maybe that's sort of what Azula is still sort of keying in on, that like, even if she does, you know, need to ask for forgiveness in certain situations, there are others that, you know, sort of feed into sort of her idea of her decision makings, and maybe that's sort of, you know, something that eventually she'll be able to sort of conflict with and sort of, you know, confront directly. But you know, this, you know, I think it's something that, you know, she still has her eyes closed down to. I mean, that's sort of the whole way that she sort of deals with the situation, is just sort of, you know, to come at it sort of head on and to sort of reject it directly here. And you sort of see that result here when she sort of lightning bends sort of the vision of Zuko here, which, you know, looks pretty impressive the way that she does it here, but that's just more of her inability to confront with the sort of situations here, which is why even at the end of this she says that I'm finished with this whole situation. Like, she's tired of dealing with
because like, she says no in a way that is just like a reactionary response, that like, I've shut my eyes to my feelings, I'm just not dealing with this. Basically, like, I'm not acknowledging my true feelings, basically. So like, her response is like, she attacks and she does say no, but like, it's very like, okay, yeah, you're not ready just yet. But yeah, the true form of the spirit is revealed. It's this pretty giant kind of slug-like thing, but it also has kind of like spider legs on it. But then it just randomly have like two relatively normal-looking hands that look a bit creepy. It does have the kind of trademark kind of eyes that are kind of like orange, red, and yellow. That's signature across the kind of the solitary monk. But as this form comes into play, the other visions fade away, including the solitary monk. the spirit. These were all kind of part of this spirit's spirit vision. I think this is a really cool looking spirit. It's very much got that kind of like original ATLA kind of aesthetic. It's kind of the Face Stealer-esque, you know. But if you've seen like the Father Glowworm like official art, it's sort of somewhat similar to that. It's really cool. What are your thoughts on the design here?
You know, I thought it was pretty cool. I think it definitely feels like it fits this sort of, you know, spirit that's sort of monstrous and transforming. And yeah, it does have, you know, some reminiscence of other spirits that we've seen before. So I think it works in terms of those. And, you know, it feels pretty sort of grotesque and, you know, sort of imposing, which, you know, I think is, you know, obviously it's a reflection of, you know, sort of the situation at hand and how that's going on. So I think, you know, per the situation, and, you know, we do get to see another, you know, sort of form of this as well. You know, it definitely has the sort of affecting, you know, sort of whatever the situation is going on type of feel in terms of the spirit.
The spirit says, my manifestations did not lie. This is a place of a sacred place of peace and rest, should you wish for those things. This temple is a crossroads for those who have followed the wrong path. It offers a second chance to choose for the better. You, little Fire Lord, were offered redemption and forgiveness, but you rejected what we had to give you. I take many forms, and it is your cruelty and desire for vengeance that has shaped me into this, a mirror of your own inner self, a monster. And then Azula responds by saying, redemption and apologies are for the weak. I owe nothing. I am Azula, daughter of Ozai, the Phoenix King. I am the rightful Fire Lord, and I do not take kindly to meddling spirits. And she does, in this case, it seems like she does the full kind of slow generating the lightning. This is like a powerful attack, and she absolutely blasts this spirit. And it'll get revealed later on that she effectively makes it shrink down multiple times over to the point where it's tiny. She hasn't destroyed it fully in this form, but has made it shrink down quite small in the aftermath. So yeah, as the spirit gets hit, it can't hold this much kind of like power. Basically, the temple kind of vision fades away, and it's revealed that she was in the forest that she was in like the whole time. And she's just like, nothing but spirit tricks. I knew none of it was real. Zuko would have been scared stiff. So she puts her cloak back on. As she does this, in the background we see a small version of the spirit creeping around in the background, so she hasn't fully defeated it. And she walks off. She finds footprints and looks over a kind of cliff face, and she finds where the other fire warriors camp is, and we'll address what happens a second. But yeah, what are your thoughts here on what the final discussion here between the spirit and...
Yeah, I thought this was cool to sort of get, you know, from the spirit directly sort of what this crossroads is, sort of what their aims are for, if, you know, the person that's, you know, having these visions, dealing with this sort of, you know, information could actually sort of become. But it feels like, you know, Azula's, you know, what they're saying here, like her cruelty, her sort of desires and everything is just, you know, it's too much for this spirit to sort of deal with at this point, essentially. And it's just, you know, Azula, again, is just confronting this sort of situation right on directly. It feels like she's still, you know, stuck with the mindset of what she had before, where, you know, she's referencing the Phoenix King and Ozai and everything like that. So, like, you know, it definitely feels like a downtrodden sort of path that she's treading again in terms of, you know, dealing with these things. And, you know, her way of dealing with spirits is just to sort of shoot them full of lightning, which in this case, you know, it seems like it worked. I don't know if it really sort of defeated it or if she just was able to sort of push through the visions here, but the end result is still the same, and she comes out of this on the other side. So it's definitely, you know, it breaks her out of this sort of loop here. You know, I wonder if it just would have been able to sort of let go regardless of her sort of, you know, using one of her most powerful techniques here in this instance here. I don't know. I wonder how this could have turned out differently, but this is how
Hmm.
it turned out.
Yeah, I like the bringing up of the kind of monster line, because that's obviously super important for like the Ursa Azula relation. As far as we're aware, again, Ursa never said that to her, that we have no evidence to suggest that that's real. So this seems to really double down on that idea of when Azula says those things, applies them to like, oh, my mother said this or feels this way about me. No, it's actually how like Azula views herself. Like it's a reflection of your inner self, a monster. And because in a way it's like these visions are manifested from like Azula's own feelings about the people around her. It's like, oh, you view yourself as a monster deep down. This is like maybe the truest kind of form of this. But there's all this extra nuance on top of that where like she knows why she is that way, but doesn't know how to kind of break free of it. And so in this moment, this chance at redemption via this spirit's powers, she rejects it. And as you say, the what she says as she rejects it, like I think everyone's pointed this out at this point. Like this is her Zuko alone moment. Like at the end of Zuko alone, when Zuko's outed as a firebender, the people reject him basically, and he then, instead of this moment of growth, doubles down on like, I'm the son of Fire Lord Ozai and Ursa, heir to the throne. Like he kind of reclaims all of this kind of stuff that he wants. He takes a couple of steps backwards effectively, but his arc still goes on after that, and it's just like going back to, in a way, like the pride of the character. And that's exactly what she does here. Like it kind of covers a little bit of everything. The idea of that redemption and apologies are for the weak. She owes nothing. Like every single one of these is like a lie basically, or it's wrong. That her view on weakness and strength is wrong, like Ozai's is, because I think like it's in the search, and I think in Smoke and Shadow, where she basically calls Zuko weak, which is basically meant to be a similar thing to Ozai calling Aang weak when he goes out of the Avatar state in their final fight, of like, oh, like all the power in the world and you're still weak. And then she calls Zuko weak for making these kind of, the choice to kind of be a different leader. And again, it's just that idea. She doesn't understand what strength, true strength actually is. That just apologizing, attempting to redeem yourself is weakness. When Zuko is like a perfect example of like, no, it's strength to apologize and actually go down the path to redeem yourself. And then, yeah, the really obvious stuff that's directly the Zuko alone kind of parallel. Her reading out her birthright, basic. That, you know, she does mention her mother. I think Zuko does. But the idea is, she says Ozai, the Phoenix King. He's not the Phoenix King. Like, that is a lie. That never happened. And that conflicts with two or three things she said about Ozai within the book already, that she views him as being weak, that she does blame him for why she is this way, and has bad feelings about him. And then the whole, I'm the rightful Fire Lord, and it's like, how strongly do you feel about that is definitely a big question. So you still end the book with like, what do you truly want? But I think I go back to what she truly wants, and I think the spirit got it right at like the very start. And it's like, what you want is like the care. Is to be loved and embraced by your family. I think that is the truth of it ultimately. But what's your take on that? Like, after all this back and forth, the spirit trying to figure out what she wants, what do you think it is that she actually?
No, I think a lot of that is stemming from her family's sort of acceptance there, and sort of, you know, her upbringing. But I think, you know, what she sees as her family and sort of her rightful claim to things is, you know, what you've been saying, is sort of based on a lie, based on sort of half truths that, you know, she's been fed, that even if she is sort of aware of, you know, sort of the manipulation in it, is something that she's, you know, not willing or not ready, or, you know, something else is sort of hanging her up on sort of truly seeing for what it actually is. And I don't know, you know, what would be sort of the thing that's really going to set her off on that sort of path, because it would seem, you would think that she's had a couple sort of like low points already here of people like leaving her out of the way and sort of betraying her from her perspective that would make her feel that she's at sort of this low point. But I don't know, she just has a higher tolerance for being sort of downtrodden, that she hasn't really gotten to that point yet, which is, it says a lot for her strength of character. It's just going in all towards the wrong ways.
And then, the final sequence here, she's looking out over the cliffs. She's tracked the fire warriors down, and she sees them at their camp. It's revealed that they have got Chio back, so they found a way to rescue her, and there's a big happy reunion amongst the rest of the group. Chio thanks them all, I'm so glad to be back with you. We'd never abandon you. Zirine, kind of the new leader of this group, is like, remember what I said when we escaped the institution? We take care of each other. I know. And she looks on at this kind of happy moment of them kind of like eating together, hanging out, and she just sort of scowls at them. But she then says, "Silly girls, unworthy of my leadership. I'll find new followers, a new place to rule. I always do." And she turns around and walks off. And so she's rejected the opportunity at redemption, but then does something that the Azula at the start of the book didn't plan to do, which was she wanted to make them pay. She wanted to find them again and punish them in some way. But now she's chosen to let them be, and she's just going to start again. And so it's like that little moment of growth that she's not going to destroy the happiness of the rest of this group. She can see that and let them be, but she has to come up with a strong reason for why she's letting them go. That's not out of just like, okay, fine, they can be friends, I'm not part of it, that they're unworthy of my leadership, that I'm above them. And this kind of goes back to the start of the book where she says like the idea of like, was it some are worthy, some will never be, I know the difference. And it's like, still doesn't quite know that difference, and she just says like, oh, they're not worthy of me, that's what it must be. But it's the problem. And in a way her saying I always do, and it's like, yeah, you always do make the mistake, make the wrong kind of choice, not learn enough in a way. And that's what seems to be happening here. It's just like Azula's going to start this cycle again. She'll turn up with another group, and it seems like she is still going to either try to force Zuko to be what she wants him to be, or has she now recommitted to I will be the Fire Lord? It's not quite clear what she'll actually seek to do, because she hasn't committed fully to it beyond that. I'll find new followers. And it's the idea like she's finding new followers, not necessarily new friends. So she's wanting to find people who she can still hold at like arm's distance, that sort of thing. It's interesting, but it's actually a cool place to leave her off with, because you can just now kind of pick her up, and new people coming into whatever they do approach with her next will still have the May and Ty Lee betrayal to focus how she feels about her family. But if you read the comics, you also know there was the Fire Warriors also as like another version of this same thing happening. But it's one of those ones where like, is it enough progress after all this time? Probably not, but I still think it's an intriguing ending. But what are your thoughts on how the book ends here with Azula? Kind of surprising choice.
Yeah, I guess it is a bit sort of surprising there, because she isn't going for like, sort of like straight vengeance, right? She isn't going to break it up. But I don't know, is it really sort of like a true sort of growth moment here, or is it just because she's, just doesn't want to deal with the extra effort is involved with sort of like breaking up what her previous sort of Fire Warriors actually were doing? Like, it doesn't really feel like she's she sees like the ramifications of anything. She just it's just like the less effort path is what she's sort of going for here. But it does lead her to something where at least she didn't go to worst case scenario here, where we're going to say that she's like completely irredeemable at this sort of situation here, right? Like, she still can have some sort of progress with however they choose to develop her character in the future, which, I think was ultimately the goal of this, right? Like, it's just to sort of open her back up so that we can do things with her in any other form.
Yeah, like some of the big takeaways from the book are definitely that like she's not out to just kill people. So a lot of the she's just a true villain stuff, not really. She acknowledges the that she is a victim of Ozai. The full extent of that definitely needs to be kind of delved into, because I almost felt like, is Azula just done with Ozai? Are we going to get another Azula Ozai thing? But it feels like we kind of have some stuff to deal with there as well, and how she kind of perceives him. But my takeaway from this is definitely this was Azula's chance at redemption, kind of by the powers of a spirit. Just Azula on her own, unable to quite make the step, constantly sort of able to realize the whole time through that no matter how kind of realistic, on the right track the portrayals of these characters are, she always saw like that it wasn't real. And the idea is sort of like, how will she react when the real versions of these characters kind of say these things to her? Like, it was a conflict with Ty Lee at the start, so they weren't really able to get into emotional kind of stuff. But when she encounters like Mei, Ty Lee, Ursa, Zuko again, and they maybe have a true, emotional conversation, what will happen then? Because the conversations won't be as kind of maybe like blunt as they were here, because this was the spirit trying to force the kind of truth about what you want out by showing idealistic version, playing up the criticisms that like Mei and Ty Lee would have of Azula. Whereas I think actual Ty Lee, I think if she saw Azula change, is open to some sort of a relationship if she saw Azula actually change. And I think that's the thing with a lot of the characters, is that we know Ursa wants to talk to her daughter. We know from like the search and so on that Zuko is not going to sort of like give up on his sister. He wants his sister in his life. And from like the search, I think we saw that the likes of like Aang, Katara, and most of the rest of the team are kind of like, yeah, like we think there is like everyone's worth giving a chance, basically. So like very few characters I think have given up on Azula. It's just like we need to see something change, and that's the real question. What will actually make her properly like reassess herself? Like what will actually force her to, when asked, like, do you want forgiveness, for her to kind of like open up her eyes and actually like say what she is really about. And I kind of feel it's probably has to be an emotional scene with her mother, because the scenes with Ursa where it's just like, I just want you to say you're proud of me, and it's like, it's very simplistic, but I think it has to be some sort of a thing where it's like Ursa saying like, I'm sorry, like, because you saw the emotion back in the search when Noriko, without the memories, was kind of like if I am your mother, like, I'm sorry I didn't love you enough, and that hit Azula hard. Imagine what actual Ursa would say. I think that's the kind of point here, and the spirit wasn't able to create the nuanced actual version of Ursa. But what are your thoughts on that going forward, about like what needs to be the next sort of like step in Azula's arc? Like what will actually make a change happen for her?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you bring up some good points there. I mean, if there's some emotional core to her character that could actually be brought forward for her to actually see, what's going to sort of help her in her life, help her sort of get to that point where she's willing to accept that, what she's been taught, her sort of upbringing, her whole idea of, having to manipulate people in order to get their loyalty isn't necessarily the best way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, she'll probably always still have like a hard edge to her character, but I think if she's actually able to sort of make, any sort of real connections with people, and, that could start with her mother, maybe it could start with Zuko. I mean, it could even, be with her friends if she actually had like a chance to actually sort of talk to them on like a level playing field. But it's just really hard to get her to the point where, she sees people as her equal. I think that's probably the hardest thing is to sort of get people, or to get her to think that people are on her same sort of level playing field, which I don't know, maybe there's a certain situation that she can be put in, or when she finally gets sort of like trapped or gets tricked, directly, where, she can see that she's really been sort of like outplayed directly, that she'll be willing to like take a step back and think about things, which it seems like the manipulations of the spirit wasn't going to actually do that, but maybe a real person could actually do that. And if the person already has a connection to her, like her mother or Zuko or a friend or somebody else like that, maybe then she'll potentially be slightly more open to that.
Yeah, I kind of trying to think about like what will be that big like emotional moment, and like how do you like construct it to get Azula to make a big kind of action in the right direction. I'm kind of thinking that like, oh, she doesn't want to kill these people that she has issues with. So what if like she forms a group in the future, but it's actually like a really dangerous group that like they are people of somewhat equivalent power to Azula. If there is a big battle, like how is Azula going to react if like her lieutenant, whatever, has like Ty Lee like dead to rights? Like she's about to kill Ty Lee. Does Azula step in and stop that? And that could be a kind of big moment, like to do something like that, where you realize that like, oh, that's not what I want, and like in a way, what have I done creating this kind of group that is this dangerous and going against these people? That's kind of like an interesting one of like her stepping in to protect her friends again would open the door a bit. It would make her kind of question like, why did I do that? But it's a tough one in terms of like you kind of know the characters needed. Most of the characters that were used in this book, it's just what do we actually do? Because like if it is a movie, it's like okay, so what? She takes over a town. She has a group. She's in control. Team Avatar plus Zuko and some other characters have to go in and stop this. How does it all work? Like, do you defeat her first, and then while she's captured, introduce Ursa to her, and you have that kind of emotional aftermath moment? Does it happen in the middle of the action? Like, there's a lot of questions like that about how exactly you make it work. But I hope they go ahead with it. I hope they have a plan, because I have confidence based on the depth that they were, the kind of topics that they approached in this book, that like they're tugging on the right strings with Azula here. I just hope they have like a plan to actually do something with that, because my main takeaway is definitely that like there's some sort of arc of redemption or change for Azula happening here. I don't think we're committing to just, and I know people will argue that like, but she rejected the call to redemption, and it's like, I think that's part of this arc, in the same way like I think it's part of like the hero's journey, isn't it, that they reject the first call to actually like become a hero. And I think it's a similar thing here with the redemption. It's like with Zuko, that first obvious rejection, but then we build to the really meaningful. But do you have any more thoughts here as we kind of wrap up the discussion?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think right now for me, I could see it going either way in terms of like where she's actually going to end up with, because it doesn't seem like, she's been, so far on the path, and, her character is still young, as, almost all of our characters here, that, there's still, some sort of saving grace that could be done for them. But I think it's really going to depend how much they feel they want to use her character in the future, which she's a cool character, she is interesting, so I can't see them like wanting to like sort of write her off unless there's really a big way they're going to sort of like do her character in the end or something like that. So I don't know, she did reject it from this sort of spirit sort of manipulations in terms of trying to get her redemption here, but this feels like this would have been sort of like a false sort of measure if she really would have accepted it at this moment here, because all divisions and everything was pretty false in this case here, and it doesn't feel like she's in a place where she would even remotely be in a situation where she could like actually talk to the other characters and they would like immediately try to like capture her. Like she's still on the run at this point in time. So I think there would have to be something lower level, that would actually get them sort of to conflict with each other or confront with each other directly before they're able to go anywhere else.
Yeah, and I definitely agree at that point because I think there's some criticism of this comic because it doesn't progress things enough. But I think if this comic had just like done Azula's redemption here in one comic, I think that's going to open up that would be more criticism. Why are you doing this in one comic? Like that was really quick to go from where she is in Smoke and Shadow to this in one comic, and one comic that doesn't actually feature the real versions of like most of these characters, because as I said before, that's what you really need here. Like she needs to be involved in the story that features the real version of these characters and see how she reacts then in those moments. Like how do they feel about her now, her action now, rather than the focus on very much on the past and internal reflection. We need to actually see her interact with others, and now it'll just be interesting to see if the subtle moment of kind of growth of like, I'll leave you be, I'll start a new group, if that means anything going forward. Like, does that mean she's going to maybe attempt to be better with the new group? But it's so unclear. So that is the comic. There's a lot to discuss with it. All the scenes, there's so many lines of dialogue to discuss here. But it's, I think, one of the best uses of one of these one-shot comics for like a character with a lot of depth like that to just do a full-on character piece. Whereas I think some of the other one-shot comics have maybe gotten a little bit bogged down because they feel like, oh, we need to have an action sequence. So there's like a quarter of the book is just some action against whatever little threat happens in the book. And there's not too much going on here, but this actually has some meaning to it because there's just such a depth to Azula's character. So I feel this is one of the most effective one-shots that we've had. Like, I still think like Suki alone and this are probably the best of the four. But what are your thoughts on that, this compared to the other one?
Yeah, no, I think in terms of a character retrospective, this is one that definitely, like you're saying, this character has a lot of build-up. So even if, this story overall doesn't really push the needle that much farther, at least it doesn't feel like it's a completely sort of like a wasted thing, because this character does have, a lot going on with them. They are a popular character, like they're interesting. There's something to be had there, even if there's, still a bigger picture for them at the end. So I think, some of the other ones I might like a little bit more because they feel like, we get to see them progress more towards like where the character's future eventually ends up. So I think that maybe in the future, this one might be more interesting than it is currently, because, right now we don't really know where Azula ends up or anything like that. So, there's still some questions out there in terms of what happens to her in the end, as opposed to some of our other characters that have sort of the solo stories, or we just know what happens to them more in the future. So, but I still think it's a pretty good sort of one shot here, and even if it doesn't have all the sort of crazy action, it's sort of balanced with what this character is sort of about, and we already know Azula can do all the cool action stuff. So
yeah, that's this comic. It's like, I think it's going to be overall helpful for the Azula discussion within the fandom, because I think there was a lot of people skewed views on Azula, when the reality of like she's like right there in the middle of like, you're meant to have sympathy for the character, but it's not meant to be sympathy at the expense of like absolving her of all the bad things that she's done. And I think that's what this comic does, kind of start to finish. It's like, yes, Azula, reflect on the fact that Ozai did make you this way, but you also do need to address then, if you are aware of that you do treat people in this way, that this is the reason you aren't friends with these characters. And it's the two sides to that, and some of that nuance can be lost, but it's difficult to read this comic and not see the nuance of the character, the main success here. And then it's just, when will we see Azula again? Because I think it's just unacceptable if it's 7 more to do anything with the character. But because we're kind of waiting on animations, it could be 7 more years. Because if she's not in the first movie, then we're maybe waiting a year or two for the next piece of content, and she's not in that, it starts to kind of very, very quickly add up. And this is where they probably need to come out and speak about what is the plan, what is the scope of Avatar Studios, how many things are we actually going to get. And then when we get Avatar Studios, does that mean we can maybe change what the comics can do, or is this just what the comics are like for now? Like that's going to be a big thing as well. Like, will we see the publishing stuff evolve, properly get going, or what? I don't know, because like you said at the start, I struggle to see another Azula comic anytime soon. I just don't see what it would be, because it would have to be proper development and plot, and that's not what they're doing. So that's the kind of confusion that hopefully know about this time next year. But yeah, overall, very, very good comic here. It is the only main Dark Horse release of the year, so like, it's not difficult this year to be the best comic, but it is actually, I think, a pretty high quality, especially given that like the writer was on record a few years ago of kind of almost being like afraid to write Azula. This is a pretty impressive first go, more or less. Obviously, she wrote Azula a bit in Suki alone, but like advancing the arc, it's a big one. So yeah, there are. That's our in-depth review for Azula in the Spirit Temple. I'll be doing more discussion on it. Like next weekend, I'm probably going to do a live stream discussion on Azula in the Spirit Temple, and I guess reaction to like the Netflix news as well. But yeah, that has been episode 265 of the Avatar Online podcast. We'll be back with another episode, I guess, before the end of the year. That will probably just be back to normal, so like episode reviews for Korra and Avatar, continuing those rewatches, plus whatever news that comes out. But for now, that's been 265. Like I said, it's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye bye.